Well, good evening. I call the regular meeting of the Ames City Council to order for Tuesday, October 11th. Welcome, everybody. And we're going to start the evening off with a proclamation for Fire Prevention Week. My bodyguards will come up here and you going to be talking? Okay. Fire Prevention Week. Whereas the City of Ames is committed to ensuring the safety and security of all those living in and visiting our city, and whereas fire is a serious public safety concern, both locally and nationally, and homes are the locations where people are at the greatest risk from fire, and whereas home fires killed more than 2,880 people in the United States in 2021, according to the National Fire Protection Association, and fire departments in the United States responded to 361,000 home fires. And whereas smoke alarms sense smoke well before you can, alerting you to danger in the event of a fire in which you may have as little as 2 minutes to escape safely. And whereas working smoke alarms cut the risk of dying in reported home fires in half, and Ames residents should be sure everyone in the home understands the sounds of the alarms and knows how to respond. Whereas the 2022 Fire Prevention Week theme, Fire Won't Wait, Plan Your Escape, works to educate everyone about simple but important actions they can take to keep themselves and those around them safe from home fires. Therefore, I, John A. Halen, Mayor of the City of Ames, Iowa, do hereby proclaim the week of October 9th through 15th, 2022 as Fire Prevention Week. I urge all the people of Ames that fire won't wait, plan your escape for Fire Prevention Week 2022, and to support the many public safety activities and efforts of the Ames Fire Department. And I'd like to say a few words.
Thank you, everyone.
Maybe introduce your
Oh,
team here too.
Sure. I'm Karen Tapper. I'm a deputy chief with the fire department. And here we have our shift commander, Nick Lucchese, firefighter Chris Osborne, firefighter Dan T, firefighter Adam Webker, and firefighter Ashley Culp. And they're from Station 1. They've all come down here today to join us. As the mayor said, the theme this year is Fire Won't Wait, Plan Your Escape. So we encourage everybody to make sure that they're checking their smoke detectors and also figure 2 ways out of your home. And then we are celebrating our Fire Prevention Week with 2 different things. We have firefighters that are visiting all the schools this week. So we've had a lot of good feedback that the kids are really enjoying that. And then this Saturday from 9 to noon, we'll have an open house. So please come to Station 1 at 1300 Burnett and celebrate Fire Prevention Week. Adults can learn a lot and kids can have a lot of fun. So thank you so much.
All right, moving on to consent agenda. Council staff has asked that item number 15 be pulled from consent. Does council wish to pull any other item tonight?
Mayor, I'd like to pull item number 19.
19, all right. Anything else? Okay, entertain a motion to approve consent less item 15 and 19.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call.
Aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Tim?
I haven't pulled a consent agenda item for months, and this is a great project, and I thought it deserved a little bit of attention and maybe a little bit of explanation. So I've asked that we could pull item 19. And John, can you tell us about this item?
Sure. This project utilizes a significant amount of DOT funding. Almost 50% of the project is funded through the DOT TAP program. So in order to utilize that funding, we have to follow the DOT letting regulations and go through their letting process. Part of that is every project that they let, they set a DBE goal, a disadvantaged business enterprise goal. And for this project, they set a goal of 3%. The low bidder only had a 1% DBE commitment. So the DOT reviewed the low bidders' line items and determined that they didn't make a good enough effort to meet that 3% goal. So they declared that low bid non-responsive.
And could you just remind us where this trail is? Because I think the public is going to be very excited to know when this is and potentially when it could be constructed.
Yeah, this would be a great trail. It starts on the eastern end, on the north side of Iowa Creek at the Wellfield access road. And then it works west, goes across, it follows Iowa Creek west, goes under Duff, and then it follows the new construction that we did in that area with a flood mitigation project. And it goes west to approximately the Walnut extension, what that Walnut would be. And then it comes up to South 5th Street from there. So
And
it makes a nice loop from the trail on 5th down along the creek and over to the east.
And this will be a paved trail.
Yes.
And could you give us a ballpark if we go through this process again and rebid? What would be your best estimate as far as when the trail will be constructed?
We're hoping this won't set us back schedule-wise at all. The consultant's prepared to relet the plans, put those back through the DOT process for the January letting. So if we do that, then we should have the contract and everything in place to have spring construction.
Oh, fantastic. So great project. I know the community has been interested to see what's going to happen there with the trees taken down and a lot of work going on there. And I think this is going to be a wonderful amenity. So
Yeah, it sure will.
thanks for telling us about it.
Yep.
I move approval of item 19.
Second.
That would be alternative 1A, B, and C.
Yes.
Thank you. All right. Roll call.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Moving on to public forum. It's time we set aside for comments from the public on topics of city business other than those listed on the agenda, and ask people to limit their comments to 3 minutes or less. Is there anyone who wants to address council this evening under public forum? All right, seeing none, we'll close public forum. Moving on to item number 24, presentation of the 2022 resident satisfaction survey results.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm back again 1 year later to present the results of the resident satisfaction survey. I come to you twice a year regarding this survey. In January or February, we kind of talk about the questions and the overall survey, and then we present the results in the fall. We've done this this is the 40th year. I can only speak about the 18 years that I've been here, but I usually come in the fall right before the budget process kicks off, which will kick off November 1st with the town budget meeting. And this is information that helps guide those financial decisions that you'll be asked to make through the budget process. And again, I just remind you, it is a snapshot in time of people's perspectives. One thing to note is that we do the survey in the spring, so sometimes what's on the top of people's minds is what shows up the most frequently in the survey, often spring-related or late winter-related material shows up. Again, it's the 40th annual survey. We did the survey again this year with assistance from Iowa State University. There's a city and ISU distribution method for the survey. We sent out 1,350 paper copies of the survey. It's 12 pages long to utility bill customers who are randomly selected. It also goes out via email to ISU students. And we had 392 returned surveys. We had half of those came from the utility bills and the other half came from students. There is an online option for people who get the paper copy. They can go online, enter a code, and take the survey online. So we had 22 of those this year. And as a suggestion from the council last year, or in the spring, we offered the survey in 5 languages, which was a really interesting thing to be able to offer. I think it was a wonderful option, and we did get one survey back in Chinese. So we will continue to do that again. The timing of the survey, as I said, it's distributed in May, and you had asked us to include two survey questions, one on recycling and one on diversity, equity, and inclusiveness. And where you can find this survey, I realize I often don't tell people where the survey is located. After the council meeting, after we do a presentation, it goes on the city manager's page on the website. And we have about 10 years of surveys on there. If you want some kind of historical look to the surveys, you can go back several years. If you want to go back more than 10 years, you can just call me and I will get you the even earlier surveys. So I tend to go over the survey. Again, it was 115 pages, which is actually a shorter survey this year. It was a long survey. There's a lot of open-ended questions. That has actually kind of evolved over time, where councils have asked for more opportunity for people to respond in a way that's different than just the standard benchmarking questions. And so those are all captured. Again, our assistants from Iowa State University, they are hand typing those in. We do go over them. I go over them, and somebody else in my office goes over them, but sometimes we might miss a typo or two. But sometimes we can't read the writing, and so sometimes you'll see a comment is a little garbled or maybe doesn't quite make sense, and it usually is because we can't read what was written. Anyway, I tend to go over the report as it appears. So chronologically, we'll start on page 7. Just the ongoing service priorities, and you'll see from this list, actually you'll see throughout the survey, overall, again, a general sense of things are going well. This sort of stay the course message, I think is once again, the overall theme of this survey. But if you look at these ongoing service priorities and you ask people, do you want to spend more, less, or the same continues to be the most frequent response. And you'll see on a lot of these graphs, the scale is at the bottom, the scale of either a 3-point scale, a 4-point scale, or a 5-point scale. Sometimes if you don't look at the scale, it's a little confusing because it changes. So everything on this that received a 2 or above, you're seeing that maybe people want to spend the same or a little bit more. Anything that would be under 2 would be less. And again, what you can tell is that for these priorities, spending the same comes through 10 out of 10 categories, with 52% to 83% of respondents saying the same. And then the top ratings were human services, animal shelter, Ride parks, and recreational opportunities of the ones that got a little bit higher on that 1 to 3 point scale. Another important graphic to look at is on page 11, the preferred property tax adjustments. This graph doesn't change hugely, which I think is a good thing that happens. The vast majority of people are saying they would like to see no change in their property tax rate at 49%. You saw an increase both in those who would want to increase it and those who would want to decrease it. Which I think if you look again at what the majority of the top vote getter was, the same, and a little bit up in increase, a little bit up in decrease. And then you can see that over the 5 years, again, stays pretty much the same year to year. Capital improvement priorities. This is one that I've watched for 18 years. And even though you see on this is a 4-point scale, you see a different scoring of these different capital improvement priorities. What you see when you ask people to prioritize their top 3, these 3 have never changed in the 18 years that I have been here. Reconstructing existing streets, traffic flow improvements, and stormwater drainage improvements remain prioritized, the first 3 focus areas that people would like to see capital improvement money spent on. One of the important feedback benefits of this survey is that we get to get specific feedback on departments. And we ask a lot of questions. You've seen the survey before, very specific to the services provided by each of the departments. And then we have a general area called public nuisance enforcement, which actually goes over several different, it's not just one department, it's served by several different departments. And overall, you see those the satisfaction rates that go from 80% to 97.7%. Those are people who are very or somewhat satisfied with those services, which overall, again, we look at historically over time, and the 2022 bar is the very last one, which I think is maybe an olivey green color. I just look at that over time, and you can see that it's fairly consistent over time for every one of those areas. The next graph I'm showing you is a chart about preferences for sorting waste. So this is one of the questions that you had asked to have included. There were 2 questions about recycling. One of them was, what kind of waste are you willing to sort? And you can see that in general, people are saying, yes, they're willing to sort plastic. They're willing to sort metals and glass. A little less on the organics, which your food waste. But you can also see the number of people who say they currently sort those things. And, you know, if we were going to spend a lot of time on this, you might want to dig a little deeper to find out what they're doing with those things or where they're taking them. I realized it might be confusing that if you're taking your plastic cans or bottles back, that might be considered sorting if you're taking deposit back. So we don't really know, but I think it's, again, that idea of a snapshot in time. How do people feel about sorting waste? We've got a pretty good idea with those numbers of the people who said yes, they would do it. The other question was asked about the preferred method of disposing of waste items. And so we asked about the no charge centralized drop off. That's a model similar to glass recycling and to food waste diversion right now. Curbside collection for a fee, then you participate in either one, or you're not interested, or other. I was talking with Resource Recovery about this, and I hadn't really thought about this way. If you add the no charge centralized drop off, again, add that to the participate in either one, you've got about 61% of people saying, yeah, you know, this is something that they're interested in. And so we offer some of those services already right now, centralized drop off. And if you read the comments in the survey, I saw a similar theme that was a little bit frustrating, is that sometimes we offer things and people don't know that we offer them. And so what it tells me is that we really need to continue to educate and let people know that these services are available. So one of the open-ended questions we asked about was, what could the City of Ames, and it was specific City of Ames with a capital C, so what could this local government organization do to demonstrate its commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion? And there were many, many comments about things that could be done. And there was actually also some compliments about what has been done already. There were people who said, I liked the sidewalks, the rainbow sidewalks. And there were other people who said there's a lot of work yet to be done. So all those are captured and included in the survey, so you can read further. I just grabbed a couple of them that people said, just as some examples. I just mentioned that one of the themes that I noted when going over this information was sort of this gap between programs and services offered and knowledge of those programs and services. This is not a chart that you'll find in the report. This is actually one that I just put together. It is a couple of questions from the survey from 2020, 2021, and 2022. I pulled it because I was concerned by some of the numbers from 2022 that I would say are sort of giving an overall feeling of community engagement. When you see that such a significant drop in the number of people who report issues facing my community are important to me, I want to flag that and watch that. What does that mean? Also, I'm knowledgeable about these issues. Again, another drop. So you can see when I just had 2021 and 2022 together, they were a little, it was a pretty big difference. When you add in that perspective of another year, you see a little bit of a fluctuation. And so the key here is that I think we need to watch this, and then we need to be prepared to react in a way that allows us to do outreach and education to citizens in the way that makes sense to them, in a way that helps them understand the issues that we as a community face, and that maybe engages them and draws them back to the table for discussion. So again, just something that, because of my interest in communication, I found this interesting. It also just, again, points out to me what a challenge it is to do outreach and education today, and that we need to continually look for tools where we can reach people. Finally, one of the charts that we always look at each year is the trends in overall satisfaction with City of Ames service quality. This good, very good. I looked at the last 2 years. Added together, the number of people who say their programs and services from the City of Ames are good or very good is at 97%. That is the same as last year, which is really, really amazing to me that we would have such a it's just such a positive reinforcement of the work that we do. However, the one thing that did happen is that our very good came in at about 37%, and last year was at 41. And then our goods went up to 60%. Last year they were at 56. So we just switched those off a little bit. 97% is still very good. We'll watch this again next year and see where those numbers take us. But of course, at the City of Ames, we strive for excellence. So we want to see those very goods continue to climb. Just a word cloud about the best things about living in Ames. There were tons and tons of comments, and they're fun to read about what people like about Ames. And I encourage you to take a look at those. Again, we had some discussion just internally about the survey and maybe ways that we can improve it. Some departments were mentioning that maybe it's time to look at some different benchmarking questions. It's been 40 years. And so maybe there's some other criteria that would be more helpful. And so we'll lose that historic component, but we may have some other factors to grow off of into the future. So, and with that, I will take any questions if you have any.
Thank you, Susan. Questions?
Maybe one, Susan, I may have asked this in years past. So we're taking this survey and comparing our information based on longitudinal data. If we ever explored whether peer communities do a similar survey, and be interesting like that engagement, that was very disturbing to me. And part of our democratic process means that we're relying on people being engaged. And so I was just curious how we compare with peer communities. It'd be interesting to know if other communities our size do something similar for a survey.
You know, I get asked a lot from other communities who does ours and how we do it. But I have not looked at other surveys in a long time. So I would be happy to research that. It's a great idea.
Yeah.
The non-student category is sent out through utility bills. Do we have any idea utility bill customers can also be students if there's like an overlap there?
Yeah, there is an overlap there. So you could, I mean, I guess, well, theoretically you could get it both places. But yes, some people who fill it out on paper are students.
Okay. I was just thinking maybe in future years we could add a demographic question that asks them if they're a student so we could sort the piles a little bit cleaner.
Yeah, I might not have been clear. There is one that asks, are you a full-time student? So we do sort them that way. So we make sure that they're half and half.
Perfect.
Yeah. So some of the half might be paper and the emails together, and the other ones are the paper.
Gotcha.
Other questions? I just had one, and that was on page 1, it talks about the reasonable certainty of response. Is that, can you explain that? It says like there's a 95%.
The confidence interval. Yeah, I'm sorry. I usually do go over that. So our survey has had a confidence interval of 95% with a plus minus 4.52% margin of error. And that means that you are 95% confident that if you gave the same survey to the entire population 95 out of 100 times, every answer would be plus or minus 4.52 percentage points. It's not, there's a 99% level, but 95 is good.
Yeah.
So.
And this is not just done in a vacuum. You talk about who you work with regarding that.
Sure.
Yeah, that's I think it's important people understand that's not just the city doing this and we're just kind of coming up with these answers or analytics.
Right. I think it's really important to understand that this is a statistically significant, valid, random survey. We get asked a lot of people who say, I didn't get it. Can I take it? That isn't how a random survey works. You have to be selected. People who want to take surveys often have a specific opinion. And so we have not we haven't offered that option for people. But when I first started here, we did this survey with Iowa State University Extension. We have since moved over to the Institute for Design Research and Outreach, IDRO, with the College of Design. And I work with Nora Lajahazen, who is a scientist. And she has some staff that helps her both with the inputting and the analysis. And I really let them do the research. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a statistician. And then they give the report to us. We go over the report and we look for trends, for big picture themes. I ask Nora if I have questions understanding graphics. Steve asked some questions earlier that I'll follow up with Nora about. And so if there are questions that you have that are more really that drill down in the science, we can ask her. She's done runs for me when I say, hey, this seems odd. Why is this like this? And she'll go over those statistics again and explain them. Usually, I've never found one that was wrong. I just didn't understand them. So, but she will do additional analysis if we ask. So if you have something that you wanted to learn a little bit more about, we can drill down a little bit deeper on it.
I would agree with Tim. I was very disheartened to see the precipitous drop in terms of people being concerned about, issues in the communities. So I think that really is for sure keeping that one in the survey in the future and trying to track what's going on, because and I just wrote down, education and communication is a recurring issue.
Right.
And so I'm
Absolutely.
just wondering if that's part and parcel of that, and that there's just a declining interest, in being kept appraised. And there's so many different ways to get information. How are they digesting the information? So I know that council's been very concerned about engaging the community. And so I think this really warrants what can we do to help improve it?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I definitely will keep an eye on this one because it was surprising for me to see it as well. I mean, you work in the field and it's hard to get people's attention, but to see it in those numbers, it was a little alarming. So,
All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Move on to item number 25, staff report regarding the Link Development Project, 300 and 400 block of Lincoln Way.
Good evening, City Council. Tonight, Julie and I are here to present the outline of development agreement terms for the mixed-use project, now known as the Link, for the 300 and 400 block of Lincoln Way. So up on the screen is your location map for those that aren't oriented with the Lincoln corridor, that the way many of City Council has been for the multiple years we've been looking at this property. So we're looking at essentially 2 blocks of Lincoln Way between Kellogg and Clark Avenue, with Gilcrest as that north boundary. As you'll see in the discussion of the terms, we also talk about the potential of a north parking garage, which is really off-site and north of the railroad tracks. If Julie could show us where those diagonal rows of parking are, that would be the footprint of the north parking garage. It would replace those diagonal parking spaces there. So hope that gives you some orientation to what we're talking about. So we have visited about this site many times, as I've alluded to in my comments. This is really a key piece of our Reinvestment District application. So back in February, we submitted to the state our application to have up to $10 million rebated to the city through sales tax and motel tax that could be generated within this district. And that's very key to the indoor aquatic center, which we're moving forward with as a key part of the Reinvestment District. So there's 3 projects in that application, all connected along Lincoln Way, and then included with the downtown north of the track. So we have the City Plaza, which has started construction across the street. We have this private development, which is the funding source for many of that, really for most of the $10 million. And we have the city project of the indoor aquatic center. What's key in the Reinvestment District, which is although this agreement does not use that reinvestment district funds for the developer's benefit, it's obviously a key benefit to the city as an outcome of this agreement. So that has always been in the background as staff has been negotiating this project, is to connect it back to the reinvestment district so that there is an additional benefit to the city from seeing development at this site. And we'll get into some of those terms that are key to that. So the project has been, I'd say for about a year and a half, very similar. Julie's going to put up the concept drawing so we have something to reference while we're going here. So for almost a year and a half to 2 years, this has kind of been the working concept for the project. We have development centered at Kellogg and Lincoln Way with the hotel property, as well as a mixed-use residential and commercial property. Now, will those be the exact footprints of the buildings? No. The hotel could slide to the corner. The mixed use can be moved around to fit how the hotel might address that corner. But the intent is that that will be the key corner as really the identity for the project as you approach from the east. Some other key parts of that area on the east is there is one large parking garage on the south side of the tracks. That will be a developer-owned and operated parking garage. It's not a city parking garage. That would support that first full phase of development, which is the hotel, again, the mixed use. And then there's a conference center of about 15,000 square feet that's included with the hotel. And then you can see how there's a plaza shown there in the center. So with the first phase of development, we would start the improvements needed to have a central plaza, but it would really be fulfilled with phase 2 when it gets lined with the additional uses and business and other outdoor spaces in that area. So with phase 1, we're looking at having improvements on Kellogg and Lincoln Way as well. You'll notice on this diagram the intent there for essentially the widening of Lincoln Way. The travel lanes don't go away. The intent is to allow for parallel parking to be added to Lincoln Way. In addition to that, we'd be adding new and wider sidewalks as well. So we're trying to make a more commercially viable street frontage there to have more access for customers, as well as improve the pedestrian and bicycling environment there. Some of the key points in the downtown gateway zoning is to limit curb cuts on Lincoln Way. So as this project develops, all of those numerous curb cuts go away. At most, there would be one off of Lincoln Way, depending on how that hotel access works for essentially visitor drop-off. The second phase of the project to the west is a combination of an office building with commercial uses, again, on the ground floor, and also an apartment mixed-use building lining the Clark Avenue frontage. And illustrated in this diagram is also the pedestrian bridge, as well as that north parking garage. And we'll go back into that in a little bit more detail. Those are features that aren't able to be committed to at this time. They're things that we and the developer desire to see happen, but there's a lot of things in front of the future city councils and the developer to get those steps to occur and see that realized. But we are showing that overall vision. This is really the intent of everybody that's been negotiating this agreement, is to try to realize this vision for the plan. So at this point, I'm going to walk through the development agreement terms. I am not going to walk through the details of all of the square footages and everything that are estimated here. We can ask questions and work through that. But I want to underscore that as a concept, council will be reviewing actual major site plans to lock in all of the design details and have way more precision than what's just as an outline of a development agreement here. So the agreement uses the fundamentals of the valuation of the buildings, which are predicated on the amount of square footage or the housing units or the hotel rooms. Those are all assumed to lead to the terms that are in the agreement, but the actual plan approval will be at some point in the future where we'll have way more precise information, and council will be the review authority for that. But if we want to get into some of those details, we're happy to explain what we know at this point in time. So at the outset of the development agreement, we've really looked at this from a couple of different perspectives. The first one being that reinvestment district. What is key with the reinvestment district is there is a timing component related to the $10 million. So this agreement in the terms has performance deadlines for the developer to move forward. And that's critical for two reasons. One, we as the city want to see the investment occur. we want to see this improvement added to the city. But secondly, it ties back to the reinvestment district. The reinvestment district has a trigger called a commencement date. And once you construct the can't remember the exact phrasing, but the most significant, i.e. valuable or expensive improvement in the district, that starts the 20-year clock. As we have identified this in our application to the state, it is the hotel component with the conference center that is the most expensive building component for the project. So as we've written this, that is the key to all of us, is that once that hotel is built, that's when the 20-year clock starts. That's when we can start to see hotel motel taxes and sales tax rebated back to the city. The developer has asked that they don't believe they could physically or logistically really develop all of the buildings at one time. So the agreement is structured to work from an east to west phasing plan with 2 phases. That first phase would include the hotel. That is mandatory, along with that parking garage in the mixed use building. The second phase has a 2-year staggered delay to allow for them to move through phase 1 and then move into construction of the office building and then the second residential building. And in regards to the phasing, the parking structure, which is proposed now as a city project at a future date by the city council, is really contingent on phase 2. Phase 1 is really able to be served by itself. That south parking garage will provide all the parking necessary for the hotel and the first mixed use buildings to operate. So that gives some time for the developer to finalize concepts for the phase 2, get entitlements from the city, as well as the city to prepare for that construction of a north parking garage. So in terms of timelines, we have in the agreement that the developer needs to start by January 1st, 2024. The hotel is to be completed. Really, all of phase 1 is to be completed by October 1st of 2025. One of the key phrases in here, though, is not only is the construction complete, but the hotel is operating by October of 2025. It's one thing to build a building, it's another to occupy it and actually be able to take room reservations and have the actual activity occurring. So this is the one thing in the agreement that says these operations need to happen on a specific date. Again, that's important to the city to see that happen. We describe a lot of the individual uses, intent on the value of the project. So each one of these buildings will have a minimum assessment agreement. The combination of minimum assessment agreements is what gets you to the projected $52.4 million of additional tax increment that could be generated by this project over 20 years. So all of those minimum values are very important in here. It's what leads you to that $52.4 million that we cite in the staff report. That $52.4 million is predicated on all, so the projection, just to explain how this projection came about, it is projecting that all of the buildings, all of the phases are able to generate value for a full 20 years, meaning that they would all actually be built as one phase. We know the developer isn't intending to do that. There's nothing prohibiting them from doing that, but that is not how it's designed. But that is what we use to calculate out the full 20 years to get to that 52 million. And now there's some assumptions about increased values and some other things about property tax rates that all go into that. But those are all things that we've had agreed upon in the negotiations to hold as a constant and really just focus on the building values to get to that projection. Now, if the valuations are greater, that would mean the increment is generated quicker, and that means the amount is paid off faster because we are capping this at a total amount of value or 20 years, whichever occurs first. So that's another key component of this. So in the first phase, roughly 55% of the increment, of the value of the project is embedded in phase 1. Phase 2 has about 45% of the value of the project. One of the other key features in the context of the reinvestment district, as well as a city goal, is that the mixed-use commercial space is actually viable. It's a key part of trying to look at this design and ensure that we're getting space that's actually filled, is active, generates an attraction for the community, and also generates sales tax, which is part of the reinvestment district goal. So one of the things that has been negotiated in this development agreement is to require that at least 70% of the commercial space, which is described in the terms of the agreement for each building, that it is filled with what's called a sales tax generating use. And that's important to us because, again, we need to generate the sales tax to ever reach our $10 million goal. And then secondly, it fits our goal then of also having viable commercial businesses and not just empty space. So we built in a cushion for the developer. 30% could be vacant. 30% could be an insurance agent or something that doesn't generate sales tax. Those are all things that could be allowed by the zoning district. But the agreement is going to push them towards a retail sales or a restaurant or some other kind of use that has taxable sales for 70% of that square footage. We do have a delay, allow for the developer to lease up the space. So I think it's 2027 with phase one. So you're saying 2025 complete construction. By 2027, I think July 1st, 2027, you've leased up and you have 70% of the square footage generating sales tax. So we put a table in the staff report that tries to show, yes, we had a very high projection in the reinvestment district, showing that at full build out, we would easily have $10 million of receipts. Well, when you start to pull that back, saying maybe only 70% and layer in the phasing that goes into the project, we wanted to double check the viability of what our application had versus what's now proposed. And in the staff report, we have that table in there showing that phase one, conceptually, great performance would still generate almost 10 million on its own. And then there's a cushion of another 5 million or so in the second phase. So staff believes with these minimum requirements, we're fairly comfortable that we can still achieve that 10 million goal that we have for the reinvestment district. So I think the developer had looked at that in earnestly, decide what they could live with and see how that would work for them, knowing there's ups and downs in the real estate market. But they did agree that that was achievable for them. And that's why it's in here in this way. Now, it is one of those performance requirements. So there is a penalty that the city council could withhold the TIF incentive related to the commercial use components if there is non-performance. There's a couple of other factors in here for non-performance, which the council then has which are performance guarantees that the council can act to either withhold permits, withhold TIF. It just depends on how it's described in this report, or not in this report, how it eventually will be in that final agreement to try to hold the developer to the agreed upon schedule and components of the project. With phase one, it's very similar in terms of what you've seen for the last couple of years, and it really matches what was in the reinvestment district application, with the noted exception of only accounting for 70% of the square footage for sales, retail sales tax versus 100% as it was described to the state. Now, phase two, I think you can see there's a dashed line that's kind of running with the PED bridge extension kind of through the site. So everything to the west of that line is considered phase two, which is really two buildings. You have a large office building that may or may not have some residential in it. It will for sure have commercial lining that east facade and likely the Lincoln Way facade. And this is very important. So those first two levels create that sense of enclosure around the public plaza space. And it's going to create that environment that's a desirable destination. Just having open space, staff believes that's a nicety, but that's not what's going to drive commerce. So we've worked with the developer and they've agreed that they can and they will tenant those spaces in a way that have uses that can spill outdoors. So that would normally mean an entertainment use or a restaurant use, something where you have engagement with customers, not just the building, but we can actually take advantage of that open space for whatever purpose. Now, that open space will be managed by the developer. It's not a public plaza. It's not our project that's across the street, but we definitely want that to be a key feature of the project. And as it's designed now, that open space leads to that transition to the north, where the PED bridge would extend off of an elevated level of the project. I think Julie's got some bird's eye views here. So this is a little tough to read, but the bridge would come off of an upper level, like a second or third level of the design of the structure, and then extend to the north over to the parking garage, if that comes to be as described in this situation. But the plaza would be there regardless. And then as you look at phase two, you have the same parameters that are described for phase one. There's some construction deadlines. There are the minimum 70% retail sales uses, describes the housing. One of the other things that's a little bit left to be determined is the actual parking and how that's associated with phase two. There's a lot of factors in the zoning for this that council can consider. We know there's going to be this large parking garage. We know there's going to be some component of parking in phase two, but there's also allowances to use public parking. So depending how Lincoln Way comes out in terms of number of public parking spaces, how Kellogg has public parking spaces, and then if that in combination with that private garage are really things that are going to be decided a little bit later on. The developer understands there's a lot of ins and outs depending on the number of bedrooms in the apartments, exactly what the square footage is for office versus retail and restaurant, because some of those things are a little bit left to be decided. So we have unit counts for the housing, and the zoning has limitations on larger bedroom units. But there is definitely a parking advantage when you stay with the smaller unit types, which is what we wanted as a city when we wrote that, versus the larger unit types. So that could drop parking down. And city council has some other options to consider public park in the general area to lower those requirements as well. So with phase two, we don't have a precise parking plan. Developers aware of it. We've walked through the different zoning issues, and that'll be a detail that is yet to come as you work through the major site plan for this project, as well as that north parking garage. And so with phase two, the city starts to take potentially obligations on with that north parking garage. So the city in this agreement would be responsible for that parking garage to the north. The way this is described in the agreement is that the city would be able to take TIF from any 1 year that is necessary to pay a principal and interest payment for the construction of that garage. The way we have it divvied up in the report is our best estimate of what that construction cost might be with financing costs. And that's where we get to about $10.2 million. The north garage, and that really kind of fits what we decided to do was look at what the project believed they needed as kind of fill the gap to make it a financially viable project. And then looked at what other TIF may be available over and above that allocation to the developer. And could we construct a parking garage with what was left? And that's where staff is saying with approximately $10 million under current environment, we could do a one-level parking deck, but have it be designed and constructed to allow for 2 additional levels above that, which would then bump capacity to over 400 parking spaces. And we've talked about this quite a bit. It doesn't seem like a significant amount of spaces on day one. There isn't a huge demand right now either. So I think that's a good first step in terms of adding supply to the central business district or to downtown. But it also is a huge step towards being able to do things in the future. Getting that first very high cost level of construction done at the beginning. It's not that it's cheap to build each additional level, but it's a much smaller amount to do the additional levels in the future if funding arises for that. So we think it is worthwhile to take and use $10 million of that TIF to try to move forward with that first level or first deck of a parking garage. As a city garage, it will not be designed with this development agreement. It'll be up to the city to hire our own design team, go through the details of what we expect as a city to be in that structure. And then that would be our own city designed and city bid project in the future. But the agreement is going to assume that project happens and establish the ability to use TIF as necessary to support that project, whether it's partially from phase one or probably in both situations, probably partially with phase one revenue and partially with phase two revenue. I would say it's unlikely that any one phase totally shoulders that cost. But with our recommendation, you would probably not even start that parking garage project until you had certainty that phase two is going to happen. It's pretty important that the developer moves ahead with that project, has started it to ensure that there's value there to then make sure that we can cover our principal and interest payments for the garage itself. Now, the ped bridge has always been shown in the plan as an optional feature. meaning there's again, things that are outside of everyone's control on whether that bridge can exist or not. We're very confident from conversations a few years back that UP would permit it. We have to meet all their performance requirements. It has to be very high above the tracks. They have some things that we have to do. It physically can be done. We do not control a piece of property north of Gilcrest to allow for that to be built, and neither does the developer. So someone would have to acquire an easement interest or something to see that bridge happen in the future. That's not something that today anybody can guarantee would happen. So the agreement structure for phase 2 requires the developer to construct the bridge, but there is a caveat that that's required only if there is the ability for that to go north. So you would not, the intent of that language is that you would not withhold construction of phase 2 because a bridge does not exist. It's meant to be that if it's possible to be done, the developer is obligated to do it with phase 2. So I hope that's clear. It's like we desire it, but it is not going to hold back the full development of this project. So as we move through phase 2, we did leave out a couple of small details. There are some improvements, kind of utility issues that have to be addressed across the site. The city, if you can look here, there's a white dash square just above the letter D on the south parking garage. If you can see that, see the cursor. So the city has a well along Gilcrest. We have, I think, 3 wells in the downtown area along Gilcrest. That well has to be removed to allow for construction of the project. So you'll see in the agreement, the developer is going to pay us for that. So it's approximately $800,000 that the developer will reimburse to the city for the act of capping and closing the well and then transferring that property to them. So the city will use those funds to augment its water supply with other well resources on the east side of town. Another thing that happens if the PED bridge is built is we have a number of overhead power lines running along Gilcrest. That could be an impediment to the bridge having to have clearances for Union Pacific. And there's some lower lines there that would need to probably be underground to allow for the bridge to exist. So that's a cost that we have in the pro forma for the developer to take on as part of their utility improvements for the area. So the high voltage at the high level, that does not get touched. There's a second set of lines that it's much lower that would have to get adjusted for the project. There's, as we mentioned before, there's going to be frontage improvements associated with all of this. And I don't know that does the phasing plan show the alley? There is an alley on the east side next to Kellogg as well. You can see right there is a piece of that alley. It actually extends all the way down. It's assumed that the city would then vacate that alley and it would become part of the project to allow for the hotel and the mixed use buildings to be done as well. They're showing that maybe it depends kind of on how the vacation process works. Maybe a tail of it still exists along Gilcrest for those properties that are not part of the project. But for sure, the southern part of that would need to be vacated to see this project go forward. So those are some of the details that are addressed in the agreement in response to how the city would interact with the project in terms of infrastructure changes, but the developer is really paying for those as well. So the city is not taking any extra utility costs on as part of this project. It's really solely focused on the TIF incentive as a city obligation for these things. And so now we've kind of talked about the layout of the project and the mix of uses. There's a last section of miscellaneous terms. When we first visited with the city council, there was 2 things that they asked for staff to work with the developer on and see if there was terms for a development agreement related to sustainability and to affordable housing that could be beneficial to the city and also work for the project. So within the miscellaneous section, we've addressed sustainability from a couple of different perspectives. We as the city enforce the current energy code as allowed by the state of Iowa. So this agreement is asking the developer to exceed current energy code requirements by 25% for phase 20% for phase 1 and 25% for phase 2 for all of the buildings. So that would be everything south of the tracks. Alternatively, the developer could choose to look at doing what are called LEED gold green buildings. So LEED is a nationally recognized green building program. It uses what was described as a whole systems approach. So it's not just energy efficiency. It looks at water, it looks at building materials and other components of scoring buildings. So LEED Gold is a very high level of achievement. We thought that if that was applied to the two most public buildings here, which was the office building and the hotel, those would be signature buildings for the project, and they could be signature sustainability statements for the project and the city as well. So the agreement outlines that as an option for the developer to pursue that for sustainability, or to look at the energy efficiency option as well. So to take that a little bit further, trying to think through how the discussion about the climate action plan applies to future projects. You've had a number of workshops. I know we don't have an actual climate action plan yet, but we've worked through different ideas of what maybe implementation measures would be. One of the phrases that is put into the climate action plan is net zero ready. And that's a design of a building that really looks at minimizing its energy use and then having the ability to size solar to then eventually be applied to a property to become net zero for that building. So it may not be net zero on day one, but if things become feasible in the future, could be just not taken off the grid, but effectively neutral to the energy consumption. So we do have that as a stated goal. We've been talking to the developer about what does that mean. It means in this case that for residential units that we would not use natural gas as something within a residential unit. So water heaters, appliances would be all electric. What the developer was concerned about is it is unclear at this point that geothermal is viable here. The city's aquifer, or part of the aquifer, is relatively near the surface here, and exactly how we would get geothermal within this footprint of the project and how would that interface with the aquifer is unknown. So the developer understands our goal, but they do have concerns about overall building heating and cooling, and to be able to commit to no natural gas for those. That's described in the draft terms as to continue the discussion. There's some big questions about how that would work on this site. And I think it was a good exercise for us as staff to think through a large project. How does that fit within some of those climate action discussions that you've had, and what's practical and what's aspirational? So we don't know practically yet on this site, but it is a site that has difficulties because it's so compact, but we're also trying to be very intense at the same time and be a very significant infill project. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you're able to do everything conveniently when you have other things like aquifers right below you. So those are our goals that we have in here to work through that with the developer further. So that would make it into the final agreement. Hopefully we'll have a little more specificity there in terms of what can be accomplished. Otherwise, it will default a little bit till you get to that major site development plan, when they have literal building footprints, have done some geotechnical investigation, and have a little more knowledge about the site. So maybe in the final agreement, maybe for sure by site plan, you would know what's viable in terms of the sustainability measures for the project. And then the last thing in miscellaneous features was the conversation about affordable housing. Typically, when you're looking at the planning and housing department and you're working with our housing division and with Vanessa, we're really focused on income levels of 60% AMI or lower, which is average median income. We feel, well, by federal programs, that's typically where you have to be for rental assistance to look at and really feel like you're addressing a segment of the market that's often neglected. So we first approached the project to see what can we look at from looking at 10% of the units as set-asides for affordable housing. The developer first looked at saying they could limit it to 80% AMI. We use 80% AMI for ownership housing, but we don't use it for rental. And that's based on the fact that 80% AMI typically calculates out to what's called fair market rent, which is essentially a market level rent. It may be less than what you would get as the premium for new construction, but in the city, it would be comparable to what you could rent a different unit that maybe is not brand new. So staff did not believe at this point that there was a much value in an 80% AMI. Again, you're getting maybe a newer apartment for a little bit less, but you're not really increasing affordable housing supply overall. So after we looked at going to the 60% AMI, the main issue with that is that with the drop in rents, that increased the subsidy expectation for the project. And as you've seen with the way the TIF is divvied up in this agreement, there was not at this point TIF revenues that you could come up with to say we could subsidize down to 60% AMI to really do 10% of the units at that level. So at this point, the compromise position is something that I've never seen, probably won't see anywhere else, is to go to a 70% AMI level. It's not on a normal chart. So it would be just below fair market value rents. So it would be something that's not a low income level, but it would be slightly below market, and those would be held as 10% at that AMI level. So you would have some stability in those rent levels compared to maybe what markets, because sometimes we have market increases that are substantially more. Those units would be held there just below market based on income levels rather than rent increases. So at this point, that's what is what the developer is willing to commit to. And at this point, that's all staff can say seems to be viable with how we understand the finances of the project at this time. So at this point, I think we've walked through the overall site plan.
You mentioned the billboard.
Oh, yes. One of the other key things in here is as we move ahead with this, there's 2 billboards on the site. I think we're all very aware of that. The developer didn't sign the lease for the agreements. He inherited them when he purchased the property. But we have put the terms into this agreement that the developer is obligated to relocate those billboards. And to do that, they're going to need some assistance from the city. And we described in the staff report that potentially there's a way to relocate one and work separately with the city on a question of zoning standards and possibly a land lease with the city to relocate a billboard to another part of the city. And if we do that, that will all be tied together in a contract that is related to the development of this site with the relocation of a billboard allowance, if that works for the city from a zoning and a land lease perspective. So if we move forward negotiating this, you will see as a separate item outside of the agreement working to have Lamar Advertising, which is the owner of the billboards, looking at doing that replacement project with you. So that's one of those other things that's another domino that needs to fall. But there's some steps with the city to see that domino fall, just like a number of the features out here. So I believe now that we've kind of covered the financial terms, reinvestment district, the layout, the phasing, those timelines for performance. So I think at this point, we're willing to take questions.
I do want to stress, we're not asking for council direction tonight. We know this is probably the most significant development project we've partnered with, certainly the largest incentive we've ever offered. So we want to make sure it's transparent to the public what we're proposing here. We want you to answer any questions, maybe take some public input, and then ask you to, at the next meeting, which is the October 25th meeting, after this information has been distributed publicly, it's been absorbed, maybe give us direction at that time. And the direction would be to develop a contract. We'll put the legal meat to this now and come back with you in the future for your final approval and more input, if you'd like, on the actual development agreement itself. So we hope that's a good way to do it, and the people appreciate that transparency.
I think I did leave one related detail out. So when we talked about the total TIF for the project at 52.4 million, we do already have an urban renewal plan. That was part of the reinvestment district application. You must have that to do this. So you adopted that about a year ago based on the concept of the preliminary reinvestment district application. And we put about a $30 million cap on TIF, which was primarily the developer incentive. And there was a few million left that we could use for city projects in the downtown area if they came up. They weren't identified specifically, but something along those lines. So when you have a cap in an urban renewal area, you cannot exceed those. So we would need to amend the urban renewal plan to restate the TIF cap. So that would be ultimately, if we move forward with this contract in parallel, we would want to address the amending the urban renewal plan to bring it in line with this agreement. So we would bring it up to at least that 52.4 million and then tweak the allowances for what projects could take advantage of TIF. Other than that, there would not be any other known changes to the plan. The boundaries would not change. None of the authorities that are within the plan would change. It's really related to that TIF cap.
Ramon?
I was wondering if you could walk us through the street frontage, what that'll look like. We've gotten some questions about that, and I think people weren't hugely supportive of that campus town development. The name escapes me, but the one, no, not Kingland.
The union.
union.
Yes.
Oh, the union.
All right.
Where
So-
where the building is very close to the street, and you mentioned when you started that there were bike and ped improvements here, so I just want to make sure we talk through those and make sure that
Yes,
Or-
this goes way back to Lincoln Corridor before this project was really in front of you. So when you did the Lincoln Corridor plan, we actually evaluated, could we even do a road diet here and take it down to a different lane configuration? That was really put on a back burner as maybe a long-term future condition. But it did emphasize pedestrian and bicycle improvements because Lincoln Way doesn't really have that as a conducive environment to those activities right now. So one of those key things was, and why we have our zoning the way it is to cut out driveway access as much as possible. But the thought has always been that when you're making a commercial environment, and I would wholeheartedly agree that with the Union project, it is not like the rest of Campus Town, partially because there is no way to park in front of the building. We did not have space to dedicate additional right of way and make that happen on Lincoln Way. So it would be like the Kingland frontage or any of those other buildings that are further to the east. So with this project, the concept has always been essentially from the sidewalk to the curb that exists today, that space would be repurposed into parallel parking. So the lanes don't change, but you take out the existing sidewalk and little bit of parking strips there. Beyond that, on private property, it will be replaced with at least a 10-foot sidewalk. So that would be in a sidewalk easement running along those frontages. So that's how we think we can make the space fit. And that's what the goal is here. So the architect understood that when we were talking to them. We can't be married to these buildings exactly. They're going to change, but they understood our intent was to have that be appealing as a commercial destination from the street, have that pedestrian environment. So you can see there's a little bit of an angle to building C, again, trying to open it up towards the plaza, trying to have the active uses along Lincoln Way, so the hotel lobby and some of those other things. Don't think you're going to see that kind of same dead space feel that you have on the Union. We ended up agreeing to some things there to let that project go through where they have a quasi exercise room there in the middle. They have a lobby to the residential section on the Highland side there that again has no use in it most of the time. And you have a couple of commercial bays. The way this is designed, I don't think we would repeat that here. The corners are both very much at the corner, again, trying to activate those with actual uses. So there would be, again, at the corner of Clark, commercial space. And then with the hotel, that will absolutely have the mixed use building or the hotel lobby there on Kellogg.
Can you remind me the sidewalk width right by the Union?
I can't quote it to you.
Okay.
It's between 10 and 15, but it's probably 10 to 12. I don't
Be-
think it's 15 there.
Because that's the point that people feel is crunched, I think. Not that it's not commerce happening, right? But that walking on
But
or
it's also
and or
that there's
biking.
no pedestrian environment there. You have a shared use path before. So the intent was you had to have 10 feet for a shared use path, but you have no separation from the road. So that environment is wholly different than anything else in Campus Town, where we have 10-foot sidewalks and then we have parallel parking as that interface with the 4 lanes of traffic.
I see.
So that's my critique of that situation. I'm not saying other people don't experience it as a small sidewalk, but it's a 10-foot sidewalk with no other buffer from anything else on Lincoln Way. So that's not a desirable thing for something emphasizing a pedestrian environment.
Right.
We think we'll do better here. There could be arcades. It could just be open sidewalks. We'll see how that building design gets fleshed out in the future. So I guess the counter would be if we didn't do the parallel parking, you might have wider sidewalks, but then you're going to be disengaged again from really being a commercial environment. That would be my concern from the urban design perspective is if the parking's not there It's drive-by commercial space that you can only access. And the bulk of the parking is going to be in that garage. I'm not trying to mislead you, but you have no way to just park on the street and go into something in this project without going into a parking structure and approaching it from the back, essentially. So at least I've always emphasized having that parking helps the commercial viability and having a presence and access, which is often very key. That Union project is really, again, you can't park anywhere next to the businesses. You have to really want to get there or be walking by it already to make that effort.
Other questions? All right.
So I'll just throw just a couple. So you talked about sustainability and the possibility of adding solar at some point. Is that something that if a city, we said that aside from how this would fit into the current pro forma, maybe as a city, we would say we would value this enough to do something with that. And part of it is just a modeling for what developments in the future should look like. Was there any further discussion of using rooftop solar on the parking garages or the other structures?
I don't think that, no, we didn't get into it as anything more than conceptually was it possible. It's possible. It's not part of the plan right now for anyone to do that. It's just too unknown on what tax incentives are available. And when you're building a project 3 years from now, what's really available to understand how to finance that. So that was just kind of left off the table as part of the discussion at this point.
But you mentioned the buildings themselves would be, and I not heard this term before, net zero ready. So the mechanics to add solar would be there. Is that if the city said, well, we understand it's not going to happen now with current market forces, but as a city, if we said that we value that enough to make that a component, is that possible?
To require them to put solar on the roof?
I apologize. I'm not asking them. I not wanting to require them to do anything. If the city said we value that and we wanted to go forward with a project like that, is that something that we could do?
I guess we could look at that. I think we'd have to sit down and compare how easy it would be to do here versus other building rooftops in the city. These are pretty tall buildings, and maybe that's not the easiest way to go about accomplishing that. But it's something we could discuss. No one's really evaluated that to this point, though.
These are going to be model projects, model buildings. So I just want to think about that. And then the parking structure, the north structure, initially that would be how many levels?
Right now, it's a ground level, which replaces ground level parking, and one level of a parking deck.
So, and then what's the maximum that the proposed structure could support in terms of additional levels?
It's been conceptualized at a total of 4 levels, so it'd be 2 additional. So 3 above ground and 1 at ground.
Okay.
400 spaces.
Roughly 400 spaces.
About.
That footprint, depending on ramp layouts and other things, it seems to be, a couple different people have looked at it. It seems to be about 100 to 115 spaces per level that you would build once you get above grade.
So the reason I ask this is that if we're going to take out the parking there and we're only going to add one other level of parking, it seems like a lot of expense for just that one level of parking. I'm just curious if council had other thoughts on that. It seems like a strategic location for adding parking. Do you have a sense of the cost per stall for something like that?
So we had a projection that if you built so until recently, we were assuming that we were going to build 2 levels and have roughly 300 spaces. And we had that projected at about a $15 million build for that. And then, so we were, we're putting in a $3 to $5 million per level, I think is what we're saying in today's terms to do that. So the estimate we have is kind of, rather than focus on cost per stall, because that's a question of detailed design. We just kind of looked at the footprint and said the cost of construction per square foot regardless of how many spaces you get, would be this. And that's how we got to our estimate. But with what you're asking, I would say pencil in $5 million per level above what we're talking about.
But I think we'll need to discuss that because when we get to that second phase, the developer may need some extra space and we may have to add a separate deck if he'll carry it on the TIF, you know what I mean? So there's a lot of discussion that has to be.
It just seems like a fairly short parking structure. Now,
Well,
it
it's-
doesn't have to
it's
be
not
10 levels, right? But
It's not planned for that. It's planned for 2 more additions, but when the demand is there, and we'll know more in a couple of years, I guess, right? Whether the
Right.
developer needs additional spaces or not.
Yeah, I think there's a lot left to be learned with phase 2 about, like, as I mentioned, the parking, what's actually required, what the city expects, how it's configured. Those are details we don't have all fleshed out right now.
yeah, I apologize. These seem like sort of silly details. This plaza, we had a chance, several of us had a chance to see the plaza in a private development in Cedar Falls that was fantastic. Could you tell us some more about how that plaza might be used? Is this conceived mostly as a green space? Would there be concerts, other events held at a plaza like this?
You might want to let the developer. talk.
Yeah, I would probably let the development team talk about that a little bit more. I would say, yes, all of those would be possible. We as staff are not programming that space. We're trying to set it up physically that it can succeed with those types of activities. But the developer probably have to speak to that a little bit. Yeah, I think with what Julie was saying there's a question again, how the hotel drop-off actually happens and works. Because on this diagram, you'll see kind of a decorative roundabout there. And then the green space to the side. We've talked about, well, they have to have the ability to spill out uses. It can't just be grass. Can you close that off and not use that for hotel access and have that bigger space? Those are all things that could happen, but that's kind of up to the developer to finalize some of those details and really reach their programming goals as well.
And final question for me this time. Maybe we talked about this before, but stormwater. So how would stormwater be addressed on a project like this?
That level of design has not been discussed yet in any earnest way. We've just been looking at it conceptually. At this point, it triggers our 5B requirements, but how that interfaces with the wells being removed, we're still in proximity of other wells. I don't have an answer to exactly what stormwater features are going to be included at this point.
You asking whether it be surface or underground?
Well, obviously, there's nothing
Yeah,
on the surface, right? But I just don't know how this works. So is that something that's done on site, or would we negotiate with them that they would do something similar off-site to offset the impacts there?
There's 2 options you can work through with 5B. You can propose offsetting watershed improvements related to your project, or you can do on-site improvements and do underground treatment. You can use some of those green spaces you see on that concept to do some of that as well.
Oh.
Could be a combination, but we haven't had that level of discussion with anyone.
Okay. So, and apologies, these are small details. I'm very excited about this. The pictures were outstanding. We've had this sort of as a pretty barren space for a while, and just to conceptualize those improvements there is extremely exciting.
Other questions?
When will we know the timing of the, so you mentioned it a little bit, but whether we know if geothermal is feasible or not, that we won't
I
have an
think you
answer.
will have, you for sure would know by the time a major site development plan is submitted. So I don't know how quickly, if you say go on October 25th with us to finalize a contract for this, is that done in 4 weeks? Is that done in 2 months? I don't know right now. So my guess is if that's fast, we will not know enough about geothermal at that point to lock it in, and it will have to be deferred to that first site development plan,
Okay.
which to stay on track here has to be next year. They need to start construction next summer
Sure.
to be able to really realize the dates that are in here. So if this goes forward, the developer can't disappear for a long period of time, or the timelines won't hold, and it'll be undone as an agreement.
Sure.
All right, we'll open up public input. Is there anyone in the audience that wants to address council on this topic this evening?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Chuck Winkleblack, Hunziker Companies. I have to excuse my voice this evening. The corn and bean dust, along with the ragweed, does not bode well for my allergies. But I just want to spend just a couple of minutes talking about just a little historical background here. I mean, this process started for me back in November of 2016 when we sent out our first letters of intent. We started acquiring properties in 16 and 17, and this doesn't show it. I think the one that Kelly had up originally showed there's 21 different parcels of land in here that needed to be assembled. Now, we didn't get the two, unfortunately, in the corner with the business that just refuses to participate. That's why we have that, and we've tried every means imaginable to get that, but we just can't get there. And along with that, we've relocated over 20 businesses that took place in there. So some had already closed, some were in the process of closing or retiring, and some were relocating. So then fast forward to 2018, we worked through with the city and worked through with you folks with the Lincoln Way Corridor Plan. And then the rezoning that followed that, which was quite contentious at some levels along the way, but we made it through that. Then in 2019, we had to do another rezoning to move Starbucks over to the other side because it was kind of the hole in the donut, if you will, right? Kind of at the end of the block there that says mixed use redevelopment site. And so that wasn't easy because the owner of the property lives in mainland China, and we were trying to blend that together with a company that has 30,000 stores in Starbucks. So we got work through that. And we're moving forward in the fall of 2019. And then the pandemic hit in spring of 2020, and everything came to a screeching halt. Then at the end of 2020, as again, things started to lessen with the pandemic, we re-engaged some of the folks that had done, some market research for us to see if the project was still viable. The research that they did said that yes, they believed that the interest that folks that they reached out to had come back, and at some levels even stronger than it was before. So we're encouraged by that. We finished up acquiring the balance of the properties and demolishing the other properties. And then we spent about the last year and a half working with staff, the AEDC, the Main Street District, the state EDA for the redevelopment district, which leads us here to this evening. So almost 6 years later, we're finally ready to talk about this, what we believe is catalytic and transformational project to the city of Ames. We've had several discussions with hoteliers, office users, retailers, restaurateurs, and we're encouraged about the level of interest and excitement we have in this project. Our intent along the timeline would be, Kelly touched on a little bit, was that assuming we can get to a conceptual agreement here, then we would work through the end of this year and the first quarter of next year to sign actual contracts with people, the hoteliers, that stuff, so that, like Kelly said, we need to be back in front of you with site plans. The one thing that you got to realize, a project of this magnitude, there'll be 6 to 8 months of design and engineering to answer all the stormwater things. And, when we talk about, Mike Esposito, I was talking to him a little bit about the geothermal and stuff that they've done at the high school. Again, different deal, but between the aquifer and these are significantly tall buildings, how do we drill what could be a few hundred wells for the geothermal in along with the piers that'll be needed to hold up these buildings and the aquifer that we'll continue to use for our city water. So our goal would be to get all of that stuff done, get back in front of you into summer. So like I said, we need to be under construction by fall. By the link going forward, and Kelly, I'm just going to touch on these quickly. We should receive $10 million back from the state of Iowa to go towards the new aquatic center. And then, like they said, if the council going forward, and that's, a lot of the discussions we've had over the past 60 days as what can you do legally? And so Steve and staff have been talking to Mark and your bonding attorney and all that stuff. So we believe that as phase 1 is done and as we're in the development of phase 2, a lot of things will be a lot more clear in regards to the amount of parking that's needed for phase 2. And if we go from 60,000 square feet of office building to 90,000 square feet of office building, then clearly that'll need more parking, but we'll also have a lot more money generated, to provide. That money will then provide, even though it's a small number, it still is a good start on having a parking ramp that we've talked about for 3 decades that I've lived here in town. It's also been brought up, that all of the money comes back to the developers. Well, that's not entirely true, and Steve will do a better job of explaining this to me, but of the tax revenue that's generated, there's a certain amount that's required to be kept by the governing bodies that I believe is about a third close to the amount. So the city still does, the city, county, and schools still do get money. So not all the money comes back to the developers. We're not asking the city to budget anything in their CIP for this project. It has to go forward on its own merit. And these things that we're talking about are rebated to us only if they're built and only if the minimum assessment agreements are signed. And one thing that doesn't get talked about is, they're talking about that this will generate $52 million of tax revenue over 20 years. I would suggest that we need to at least consider that for the next 20 years going forward and the next 20 years after that, there's another 52 or $100 million of revenue generated. So enough about the monetary things. We've been talking about what kind of housing can we do to attract younger people, to keep people from moving to the East Village, to keep them from moving to Prairie Trail. We believe this is all of the things. One of our developer partners has been integrally involved in the East Village in Des Moines. Another one's done a number of projects like this in Mankato. So we think that's really important to find a way finally to have housing and stuff that will keep our young people and whoever wants to live there, but primarily that's been a discussion for a long time. The link to downtown, again, we know it's uncertain. We don't control the land. But for us, and in talking to the folks in the Main Street area, the proximity to downtown is crucial to this project. And people have said, well, gosh, are the downtown people upset about this, or are they thinking for competition? I have not had, and I'm not speaking for everybody downtown, but the lion's share of the people that I have talked to in the Main Street board that I had the good fortune of being in front of a couple of times, they're excited about having several hundred people live and work within walking distances of their business every day. So we feel like that's a really positive. The other thing about, we talk about sustainability and people can live, work, play, all of those things can happen in this area. We'll have to work through the parking stuff, but we have a number of people in the residential buildings that I do own downtown that don't have cars. We believe a lot of them here will be as well. We believe this is an infill project. We talk about infill a lot, and we believe that this will be catalytic for other infill projects as we go forward. And finally, I think this provides a lot additional attraction. Some of the potential users we have here are things that would be new to our community and assets that we could all be proud of. So just a couple of things to follow up on Tim's question there about solar. I do think that solar will be in use in this. The folks that we're working with, our developer partners, have put those into projects that they've used. Some of the things that we have to be concerned about are a little bit of like if we have, one of the things we're talking about is a hotel with a rooftop bar. And then so if you have solar on the building next to that, people aren't going to want to sit there if they're looking at something that's blinding them, if you will. But certainly the intent to be net zero ready typically means that we're planning for the future. The folks that we're dealing with have a lot of experience in that. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Chuck. Any questions for Chuck?
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Chuck, I have one question. So when this came to us last time, there was a developer. Is it the same developer now? Has that changed?
No, it's the same folks we've been working with since last fall.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Good evening. Dylan Klein with the Ames Economic Development Commission. This is a fantastic project, and I want to voice our enthusiastic support for this. Chuck did a fantastic job of talking about some of the benefits of this that will happen locally. I would like to focus on the benefits for business attraction, which is my role with the Economic Development Commission. This has been already paid dividends as a marketing tool for attraction of businesses to Ames of all different sizes. I've got one project that I'm hoping will be coming here next fall that will be the housing that will be added, people living downtown were integral in attracting this business, and it will be something that the people of Ames will be very excited about. For our Prairie View Industrial Center, east of town, more and more site selectors. These are organizations that facilitate selection of sites for large industries around the country to find the ideal spot. Site selectors are putting more and more emphasis on placemaking for communities. And this is truly a once in a generation opportunity that will change the landscape of downtown literally and figuratively, and will provide those amenities that, as Chuck mentioned, will continue to attract people to live downtown, will have amenities that will attract large industries because their executives and their folks that work in their factories and all of that will have opportunities to do more in Ames, to spend their dollars here. And then also the folks that are living in these the folks that are staying in the hotels, but also living in the apartment towers, will spend their dollars here in the community. And so the economic impact of those dollars being spent here as opposed to Ankeny or Des Moines or wherever else people choose to live is something that needs to be held in perspective as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Dylan. Anybody else? All right. Close public input. You want to review again the
I guess
the schedule and
Yeah, the direction I'd like from you, with a motion to allow us to proceed with developing a final developers agreement, which the basis are the terms that you see here. Might be, when you word it, wording might change a little bit, but the basic terms are existed here. We want you to do that at the next meeting, the 25th, not tonight. If you want, that's the next step to allow us to proceed with that. And then we'll have to work with attorneys. Probably we'll use an outside attorney along with Mark here to develop the agreement, finalize it with the developers and bring it back to you. I can't tell you whether it be 4 weeks or a month or whatever, or 2 months or whatever, but we'll move expeditiously past that. So tonight, just want you to take it in, want the public to be aware of it. Any questions you might have, you can call the manager's office or call Planning and Housing. We'll try to answer any questions you might have. And on the 25th, hope you're prepared to give us direction. We've worked with the developer for many years, and a lot of concessions were made on both parts. The numbers have changed, but you can imagine how the economics have changed on this too, with price of materials, the availability of materials, interest rates. So things have changed substantially, but the quality hasn't. And this is historic for the city of Ames for a developer to take the risk, take the initiative to actually purchase a square block to accomplish a unified development, a true mixed-use development, which we haven't seen in the history of Ames. So it will be a catalyst for the downtown. It's certainly in keeping with your direction on the Lincoln Way corridor study, which you wanted to focus in this particular area as your first project in. So that'll be a great addition to not only downtown, but I think to the whole city. So We hope you'll give us our direction at the 25th, but there's time for people to give input before you make that decision.
So just point of clarification, you don't need any motion to proceed.
Nope, not until the 25th.
Yep. All right. Any closing comments, Kelly? Questions?
Nope, none of us need anything else clarified.
All right.
I guess the only thing I would add, what Chuck said is we didn't describe this in detail about TIF, but it is true that it's not 100% of the revenues generated off the property that go back in the TIF rebate. All taxing entities do receive their debt service regardless, which is different than tax abatement. They are different tools. We're using TIF, so every taxing entity does get their debt service returned to them as part of this. So it increases that tax base for all taxing entities. It's the general levies that are used for the rebate purposes.
All right. Very good. Thank you. We'll move on to item 26, North Dayton Industrial Park, 2105 and 2421 Dayton Avenue.
So Justin Moore is going to present the preliminary plat. So we're going to go through that project separately, and then we'll move to the development agreement after you make a decision on the preliminary plat itself.
Great. All right. Thank you. So this is a preliminary plat. This is for land that's currently addressed as 2105 and 2421 Dayton Avenue. This is located just west of the USDA on the west side of Dayton. There, as you can see, and north of Color Biotics, just to the south of Eagles Loft Daycare. So the applicant here, a developer, is Dayton Avenue Llc. And this is approximately 73 acres of land. The background on this, just briefly, is this was annexed earlier this year and then rezoned this past spring with a master plan. The concept of this came about after some discussion last year on having smaller sized industrial lots for development in the city, and recognizing that there was a shortage of those coming about in the immediate market here. So there are 10 lots proposed with this preliminary plat. As you can see there, 5 of those lots, primarily on the north end up here of the proposed development, are what we would refer to as small lots. Those are below 3 acres in size. And then we have another 5 lots that are just below 5 acres on up through just below 11 acres in size. And those are the larger lots for purposes of the term here in this development. There's 2 outlots. Both are dedicated to stormwater detention and some wetland preservation. There's one to the northwest, outlot B, as you can see right here. That's just over 11 acres. And you've got another outlot here to the southwest corner of the development that's a little over 6 acres in size for stormwater detention. The access for all of the lots will be off of this loop road here, known as Bailey Avenue, and that will intersect with Dayton Avenue at 2 points, one to the south and one to the north. So all the lots will be accessed directly off of that road. Nothing will be directly accessed off of Dayton Avenue. 2 of the lots, of course, are through lots, so they'll have frontage on both sides, lots 9 and 10 there. Just briefly, just describe the utilities for the subdivision here. So it's probably best to just conceptually show you off of this drawing. So the water and sewer mains right now currently come up from the south down here along Dayton Avenue. They will be extended into the site sanitary sewer will along Bailey Avenue there. There is also existing water main that comes up Dayton Avenue. And so the water utilities will be extended off of that, also along Bailey. There will be, of course, as I said, the 2 detention ponds. The way the stormwater drainage here at in the subdivision will drain is the northern 2 lots here will flow into Outlot B, right here to the northwest. And then from right about here along Bailey on to the south and southwest, the remainder of the lots will drain down to Outlot A. The intent here again is to develop small industrial type businesses. We have had some discussion with the neighbors to the southwest, the neighboring property owner, Isaac Walton. They had approached the city and the developer with some concerns about stormwater drainage onto their site. So here over the last month or so, the developer, along with city staff, and us have had some discussions with Isaac Walton League about coming up with a solution for some of the discharge points for stormwater along the west property line here, along lots 2 and 3, right over here to the west and southwest. The developer and the city have been working together to come up with a solution that maintains discharge of water under normal events or small events, less than a year, annual type events, where they currently discharge now as undeveloped land. So this would maintain normal water drainage at the current, or rather on the current, to the current areas on the property to the west there that Isaac Walton owns.
So I'm sorry, could you complete that then? So I think people are surprised sometimes the development actually improves surface water flowage. And so is what you're saying, just to summarize this, to keep it the stormwater status quo, or would there be improvements as a result of the development?
So our city engineer could probably speak best to that. However, the way that the system is designed is to obviously direct and handle the stormwater per the city standards. So what that would mean is that any large events over, I think, and beyond what a 1-year event would be considered, and our engineer could describe that better than I could, would discharge off-site as they normally would now under current undeveloped conditions. Anything above that would be required to be detained in the detention ponds. So Tracy can explain that a little bit better.
So the 1-year storm that Justin is talking about is about 90% of the rain events throughout. The stormwater currently is, as we continue to work with them, going into the same directions to not negatively impact the natural resources that they already have on their property. Water quality is also a component. It's an existing agricultural field, which means that there's a lot of nutrients being added to get the crops to grow.
Right.
So with stormwater come different things. So we have hydrocarbons, or we have drippings from the vehicles on the pavement. We have sand, just soils, those types of things. So it's different that the stormwater is taking out. So it's taking out more of the sediments, dealing with the hydrocarbons and that type of runoff compared to the nutrients as an ag field.
I have some questions too, but why don't you finish your presentation, then we can circle back. Maybe Tracy. All right.
Sure.
Can stay there with Caesar.
So obviously with just to kind of wrap up the utilities discussion, we do have a condition in there tonight about extending a small section of sanitary sewer line along Dayton Avenue. And that'll go from this north intersection of Bailey Avenue with Dayton on north to the north property line. So that will be conditioned to be put on the preliminary plat and with the public improvement plans by the developer. We also do note as a condition in there that the Army Corps is still finishing the review of the wetland permit. And so there's just a couple other things that they need to do. They're finishing that up. So this would be conditioned on that eventual approval as well. So with that, I can take any other questions. One thing too, I will mention, you do have an exhibit at the end of this that shows a building footprint. And that is not material to the layout of the site or anything. So that can be disregarded as far as anything that's material to the preliminary plat.
Questions for Justin? So on lot 2 and 3 in the council packet shows disturbed wetlands along the west property line. So is the concern that contrary to most owners or adjacent property owners, they want that water coming in at those same locations? Or can you kind of identify what is being, what the concern is? Because it would seem that what is being proposed is going to reduce the flow off of the site. And I think it's the first time I've heard of someone actually complaining that they're not getting the same water coming off. So can you kind of articulate that a little bit and help council understand? Because we obviously have gotten emails regarding that. And so I think it's germane to the conversation.
And there are definitely people in the audience that can speak. I don't want to speak for the adjacent property owner, but I can talk about what we have received as far as information goes. So the concern has been, yes, the natural resources or waterways that they have going through their land now, and how much they care about water quality and want to continue to not be impacted by a change of water quality, because they've done a lot on their land to conserve and to improve water quality. And so the concern with the original design was to take all the stormwater to a large pipe, take it to the southwest to a stormwater basin. Now, I will admit, we work with some land developments that the adjacent property owners are happy that they're going to dry up a wet area that's not an official wetland. And so sometimes it works. Other times, such as this, there's people that are concerned about that. And so then we need to make sure that the drainage patterns are kept and that the stormwater is continuing, but that it's cleaned, because water quality is also important as it's being discharged. So that's where this development is. And so again, we go back to continuing flows in that direction while also having some sort of water quality feature, but having the extreme flood events, because when you add pavement, you increase the stormwater runoff. So you're increasing volume, and you can't increase all that volume to the west, because that's going to erode all the waterways. That's going to really negatively impact the development to the west. So it needs to have the flood control go down to a stormwater basin where it can be then controlled and detained, but you can get that regular flow still to the west, so not to dry up their resources. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. So I heard Justin say the developers been working with city and Isaac Walton Lead and trying to get this thing worked out. Has a successful resolution been achieved to accomplish everyone's objectives?
I do not believe so. We have really worked towards that, but just in a conversation yet today, it sounded like maybe they still have concerns.
I'm just trying to tease out in terms of if any developer is complying with city code, and if you wouldn't have brought this to us if they hadn't, right? They would still be you'd still be working with them versus bring it to us.
I
or
think
to council. So I'm just confused in terms of where this stands, because I think from what I've heard, the developer is trying to work with adjacent property owner and meet the city requirements.
So I think the difference is that our code, our ordinance is not numerically based. So we can't say they need to remove 100% of the hydrocarbons, like 80% of the sediment. We can't say. So to what extent, that maximum extent that meets our ordinance, is that good enough for the adjacent property owner?
So it sounds to me that the only solution is it remains farm ground to satisfy the adjacent property owner then. And the point
I can't speak for them, so I know they're in the audience.
I'm just trying to tease out that it just seems like I get and understand and sympathetic to it, but if there's efforts being made to try and improve the water and control it, it just seems there's a handcuffing going on of any developer who wants to develop on that property. And I get that, but I'm just trying to understand, what does the ordinance say as council's interpreting it? Where does our responsibility, or where does the city responsibility stop? And where does the moral responsibility begin?
So what we have been submitted now, Army Corps of Engineer permit could come back and have conditions on it that we have to address. But what we have in our hands is an approvable stormwater management plan that meets our ordinance.
So does the Army Corps look at the water quality discharge then? Is that right?
So they look at the impacts to wetlands. They had asked for some additional archaeological information to work with the state historic preservation. So I think they're waiting on the SHPO response, and maybe Chuck Winkleblack has an update on that, but we haven't seen that approval come through yet.
And you mentioned the sediment. It seems like we're also talking about this, or council talking about this regarding Ada Hayden and protecting that watershed. And I think that the conservation overlay and the process is actually being successful. Isn't this a similar approach where it's going to some basin to kind of let it settle out and hydrocarbons potentially evaporate? And I mean, honestly, a lot of times I see these basins just be static. The water just sits in there and doesn't do much. But
yes, and the storm sewer system, so you have a parking lot and it's going to have intakes along that side, and then that's going to get into the storm sewer system. So that's going to take those hydrocarbons, and that's the whole point of the water quality volume, is that we have these long periods without rain. The hydrocarbons, pieces of tires, all of that stuff are on the pavement. We get this 2-inch gushing rain or 1.5 inches, and it washes that off into the storm sewer. Well, if that goes directly to the creek, in some areas, but if we have the stormwater basins, then that goes to the stormwater basin. It's captured there, settles out, and so it almost even acts as a secondary containment. If there is a fuel spill or something like that, then it'll be secondarily contained and they can go and clean it out of the basin. And then that doesn't just immediately pass it on downstream. So like the new wetlands on 5th Street by the Boys and Girls Club treats 92 acres, water quality volume. And what we're finding are a lot of cigarette butts from downtown floating in the wetland that used to just go right into the stream. So you start seeing these things that used to go directly into the waterways, but they're able to get captured and secondarily contained within those basins, which is the point of them.
in that example, you haven't seen adverse effects on adjacent watershed because of that capturing and discharge.
Every once in a while we'll have like at a point of discharge where you put some riprap to get that from a pipe flow to back to a sheet flow. Then maybe there's a little bit of erosion that you need to continue to monitor and repair at times. But otherwise, continuing to get that vegetation established that has that deep root system is really key. So it's just the timing of getting that, which usually takes a few years.
Thanks. Any questions? All right, we'll open up public input. Are there individuals in the audience that want to address council on this item tonight? If so, would you please come to the podium, introduce yourself and your address, and you may begin.
Good evening. My name's Paul Reedhead. I live at 1200 Ridgewood Avenue. I'm on the board of directors of the Ames chapter of the Isaac Walton League. So I believe a few days ago, you received a letter from Gene Nosco. Gene is a member of the Ames chapter. He's also an attorney. So he talks attorney. And he sent a letter of objection, which contained some of our concerns. I think I can address some of the things that you asked, Mayor Hala. So the Isaac Walton League has 900 members. So we are a fairly large group. We're probably the third, fourth, fifth largest Isaac Walton League chapter in the country, which is pretty unusual. So there's some history that you all saw. There have been some meetings. One member came when this was, I think, discussed preliminarily and raised some issues about water flow and so forth. Subsequently, we had a second meeting with the developer, the engineer, about 4 members of the chapter, including Gene Nosco, and city staff. And we got a 5-page report from Bolton and Mink. I'd call this a 6th grade document. Okay. It does not contain any information that was particularly valuable to us. And I'm going to speak just for myself, not for the group. Okay. That was my opinion. And it was hard to disseminate what was going on. We've asked for some other documents. I would say that, water quality is our concern. And originally, there were the two, the north and the south drainage areas. There's a third drainage area in the middle if you want to put the map back up, if somebody could, or bring it down to where we see just the one with the overview of all the development sites in it. And there's a middle waterway that comes in. Yeah, there. Okay, that'll show it. If you want to go back. So in the middle of this picture, you can see between the 2 lower lots, there's a diagonal that runs across there, and that is a waterway. Originally, all the water from there was going to be sent down to the catch basin or the detention basin on the south side. By the way, that's a 6-acre detention basin. It's about 17 feet or 7 feet deep. So it holds approximately 6 acre feet of water. That's a lot of water to retain. There were 2 concerns with water. One is we don't want too much and we don't want too little. We have a lake on our property, and that lake, as all lakes around right now, is low. So retaining water in this basin would cause there to be less water in our pit, in our lake. And this is called a wet retention basin. So it drops, it has a certain level, and it's going to maintain about 6 feet deep, as I understand. And I haven't been able to find out as much as I would like. So we see that as a concern. So the excessive runoff that we used to get when this was ag land has been mitigated. The problem is that the water where it used to have, you had nitrogen runoff. Now we're going to have oil, and we're going to have particulate matter. We're going to have sand. We're going to have salt. So the dynamics have changed. When that concern was voiced, as I understand it, as I've been told, the city engineering staff went back, and they now have a drain in the middle that runs down through here, which was a natural drainway before. And that supposedly, I've been told, has a vortex trap in it. And a vortex trap, to my description, runs the water around this way, and it's supposed to centrifuge out particulate matter. Some engineering friends of mine have, when I told them about that, they just smiled. I took that to mean, not so good. But that does not deal with salt that's in that water because, imagine in the spring when the ground's frozen, things melt, it runs over the surface of the ground. That water's all going to run through that trap and out onto our property. And ultimately, down below what we can't see is our pond. So we're concerned about salt being in our water. And in the winter or in the spring, we'll also have petrochemicals, oil runoff from there. So that is, as somebody I was asked, is that a problem? And yeah, it's a problem for us. We don't want anything different coming down. We like clean water. That's the bottom line. The north outlet doesn't seem to be a problem to us. We haven't hired anybody yet to help us with this. One of the problems I see is because of the size of the development, there's really nothing else they can do on that central waterway in terms of mitigating the elements that are going to be in the water. So we're going to disagree with how this is done at the moment. We've been told that it's not our position. It's not our place to say what should be done because that creates problems. I would say too, having worked with Prairie for 35 years, the wetlands are, and it was referenced that there's a marsh on our property. There is no marsh on our property. I'm not sure where that term came from in the city report. I think it referred to it actually a detention basin that we had built years ago that is essentially non-functional now. It's had damage and it doesn't act as a detention basin anymore. But anyway, I get the wetland mitigation and I'm all for, I love wetlands. But these are full of reed canary grass. It's an invasive species. I'm skeptical that there's a wetland, except below that old pond up there where the dam is leaking. There's probably a wetland now below it, but I'm sure it's full of reed canary grass. But we haven't gone there to check it out. So anyway, if you got questions, I'll answer them. That's kind of a summary of why we're not opposed to the project. We're just opposed to the water quality that we're going to get from the project. And once it's done, where do you go? Well, we probably will start monitoring the quality of water coming out of the system to see what it's like, to see if it's a problem. And if it's a problem, we'll probably come back and say, it's a problem. What are you going to do about it? And we've been told by the attorney that, that is an ongoing issue. So ultimately, I don't know who's responsible for that, but we're just wanting to do our part, I guess. We're not opposed, development. I'm a former business person. I was in on the Somerset district, and it's a great build. I really appreciated that, and I appreciate the stormwater detention areas that I see around the city of Ames. They're really great. Anyway, I'll answer any questions everybody has. Thank you.
Thank you.
So is it just that central area there between 2 and 3? Is that?
No, there's a couple of different spots. You can't see it because of the trees, but there's a couple of different areas that it comes through, waterways through to the west onto their property. Yeah. So there would be 2 points where discharge points out of the large storm sewer would take place. And then they've proposed, but they haven't tied down specific type of unit, but some sort of hydrodynamic separator that would filter out the water quality issues of concern. So the specifics haven't been figured out yet. There's several different brands and manufacturers, and so we would still need to get those details.
Okay, but there's no problem with the water detention areas. This is separate from that? I'm just trying to make sure I'm understanding.
Yeah, the northmost one, they're adding another detention basin.
to take, sorry, I scratched my eye, so I am having trouble reading it, but I think it's lot 5 and 6. That's why I'm wearing my glasses. But so that goes into their existing basin. So
Okay.
that'll have several different components before then discharging onto their property. It's the lots 2 and 3 that have the very large, the 48-inch storm sewer that was going to the basin to the southwest, that then they'll do 2 other points of connection to keep water going to the west
Okay. Thank
with
you.
those separators. And they do make those separators, they do make them for oil and greases and sediment to get the sediment out. You know, they pay attention to those
So there are more
aspects of water
options.
quality.
Mhm. Okay, thank you.
Hi, I'm Steve Buck. I live at 217 22nd Street here in Ames. I'm a member of the Ames Isaac Walton League. I'm probably speaking a little bit out of turn on this, but there's several things I wanted to bring up that are concerns to us as an organization and for our site, that eliminating the farm ground usage of that is going to greatly cut down on the farm chemicals, nitrogen, phosphates, which would be good. It'll also cut down on the silt, which has been a major problem over the decades. But some of our concerns that are still open is that this is a 70-plus acre site, whereas before water could move from it onto our property in many areas, but primarily 4 drainage areas. This plan has cut that down to 2, with apparently about 90% of that water all going to the south entrance, coming in a ravine on our southeast corner. And among the things that we're primarily concerned about is that many of you may recall the storm Ames had in 2015 that was considered nearly a 100-year storm, which nowadays happen fairly regularly. We have a 5-acre lake on that site that at the time we had almost 4 feet of storage above normal lake capacity, so about 20 acre feet. That topped our dam. And I was on the committee that looked at that. I came to Ames shortly after that period. And when we looked at the farm ground, the drainage system, and we used all the state regulations to figure out what we had to have for outlet flow, so our dam wouldn't be overtopped again. And all the factors that were considered in that, everything from slope to vegetation to time of the year, we haven't heard that any of those things have been directly addressed in this new plan. And so right now, if they have a 6-acre drainage basin taking most of that water, which is a little bit larger than our pond, but if they're only talking 1 or 2 acre feet of storage, that's less than half of what our pond held that didn't work in 2015. We had to change our water level. We had to widen our outlet greatly to withstand this. This type of plan worries us that what we planned for based on all the regulations isn't going to hold. The other major concern is that although we're eliminating the agricultural chemicals, we're looking at a lot of parking area, pavement, roofs, and all this water is being directed into storm sewers, rushing it into their retainment pond. And that's going to change the dynamics of how fast that water moves through compared to the farm ground that it was. The other thing is, and I have no idea how to estimate how much salt a development like this puts down in 1 year's time. All of that's not held permanently in their retainment basin at that south corner is going to wind up in our pond being the new retainment basin for this development. So you've taken a lot of landscape water, funneled it through very rapidly to one basin, and now you're putting it back on the surface, which then runs into our property down the ravine to the pond. And from ours, runs back onto the surface, down across Stagecoach Road into that bottom farmer's field. So whether it's salt, whether it's runoff oil, if there's spillage of something on these sites, it's all going to wind up hitting 3 spots. Only one of them is on this development, and that's pretty much contained to their corner. So we have a lot of things to be concerned about, what's going to be coming down and how fast. Any questions?
Did you say that you were pleased that the nitrogen, silt, and phosphate was being eliminated, or you wanted that?
Yes, no, that's going to help us greatly. Issues of pondweed. Basically, that's a plus. And we've seen this coming for years, and we're actually thinking, wow, this could be good. This point where the water drainage, we don't think it's been resolved to the point we can work around that. That's what we would like the council to have considered to a greater degree and talk with some of the people that know a lot more than I do on this. But I'm just basing this on the committee I was on when we tried to resolve these issues after the 2015. This is scarier.
The water that comes from the site, how does it get to your lake? Is it all surface?
Yes.
And where's the dam that you talked about? I'm looking at a satellite image of the of your lake.
Okay.
Is it on the southeast corner, or where's it at?
Yeah. Our dam would be on the northwest side of our 5-acre pond.
And then where's the
I don't
water
know
go
what photo you're looking at, but you should be able to see that very straight line,
from?
which is our dam.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Still Chuck Winkleblack, Hunziker Companies. I think I've been in this building in front of this dais a number of times and feel like we have a pretty good history of working with neighbors, trying to resolve problems as they come up. And that's still our goal here, is to find a solution that works. I think to the mayor's point, I've been doing this not quite 3 decades, and this is the first time that I've ever had somebody say, hey, we want that water that's coming to us. So a little bit uncharted territory for us, but we sat down with city staff and with the neighbor and said, look, our goal is to be a good neighbor here. And I'm not going to speak to the issues that they have. I think the last gentleman talked about some of the issues with the amount of silt that they have in the pond and some of the other things that they've had that I don't think fishing is a large activity. I'll let them speak to that if they care to, because of the issues that they have with their pond. And we're all for monitoring whatever. We again want to be a good neighbor. We feel like we've worked well with Cesar and Tracy to be compliant with the city code. And I'm going to let Greg talk to some of the technical questions, but just wanted to reiterate that our goal is to be a good neighbor. We want to work with this. Sometimes we just come to where we have to agree to disagree, but for us, our goal is to work with the Corps of Engineers to delineate the wetlands, to do what we need to there. We still, what's holding us up now at this point is SHPO's interpretation of the Corps of Engineers report about how big of a buffer to put around the Pioneer Cemetery that's out there. So we believe that the wetland issues have been dealt with, and right now we're waiting for SHPO to sign off on the latest things that were done by after our archaeological study was done, after the wetlands delineation was done. And so again, we want to cooperate. We want to be a good neighbor. And some of the technical things, I'd like to have our engineer come up and talk through a few of those.
Mayor, Council, Greg Broussard with Bolton & Mink, 1519 Baltimore Drive, here in Ames. Heard a couple of things tonight I just wanted to talk about and address, give a little bit of background. So when we did our first layout, like we've always done, and we've never really had a lot of neighbors that say, no, we want that water. We're trying to be good neighbors, and so we were taking everything to that southeast through a large pipe. We then heard from the Ikes that said, hey, we're concerned about these drainage ways. We really want to maintain that water. So then we started to look at how can we still meet the city's requirements of release rates, but still be a good neighbor and get that flow out. So what we looked at, there are 4 points where flows off site. There's the existing pond on the north on Outlot B. You have then 3 kind of drainage channels throughout the site. So what we have done and what we're proposing is that obviously Outlot B will keep water flowing through there. On lots 2 and 3 through those existing drainage ways, what we'll have is we'll have a storm sewer structure that takes all of the storm water from lots 2 and 3. It will allow a small amount of water, depending upon the size of the rain, to divert, to keep water flowing to the Isaac Walton Lake, to keep their facility the same as it is today. The big storm events will continue through the large pipe down to the south to the new stormwater basin on Outlot A, which will then carry and handle all of the large regional detention that we've worked with the city to determine the sizes and the flow rates. And then it will release water down on Outlot A based on its pre-existing conditions as well. One of the other things that after talking with the Ikes that they brought up was the concern over, okay, we're getting water. What's that water quality look like? And Tracy alluded to this. What we're committed to install, they're called hydrodynamic separators. The hydro part of that is hydrocarbons. So getting your oil, your grease, that stuff out of there. And so what those are, they're very popular when you start to get into communities that have a lot of waterfronts. We haven't seen a lot of them in Ames because they're very cost prohibitive, but they work very efficiently in pulling those items out. They're essentially inside a manhole, and what that device does is it does have a velocity, but then they've also got, depending upon which system you use, and we'll design the system based on the lot use on lots 2 and 3 and kind of what those are to make sure we're meeting the requirements for water quality on those lots. But essentially it will strain your sediment out, but then it will also have the ability to pull oils and let those separate so you can pull those out at a later time. That I think works through everything that I had. So we're going to keep maintaining those 4 points. We're going to add water quality to all the outlets. Any questions for me?
Go ahead.
How often, so you mentioned that device that cleans, I'm just curious, how often do those need cleaning and who does it?
Yep, that's a great question. So we'll have to work with the site owner on the timing and how often they will. It will really depend upon the cleaning really comes to the debris, especially if you're starting to look at large industrial site. What are you getting for debris? Is it a pop bottle? Is it cigarette butts? Is it other stuff? And just kind of how often those need to be cleaned.
Excuse me. Bronwyn, if I may, I think with the development here, there will be a property owners association that they'll all pay in dues because it's all part of the same stormwater system. So all of those things will be maintained by everybody that is in the whole subdivision. So that's our intention, because when I was talking to Kelly about, generally the city takes over the dredging if needed in that, but he said in this case, that's not the case.
Only residential.
Only residential. So we'll need to start to build a fund that will handle the monitoring, handle all of the things that we need to do so that we're making sure we're maintaining our water quality for the subdivision.
And they will get nice letters annually from your stormwater staff that reminds them to do their maintenance.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
There's a question raised about, they're concerned about, they say they have a 5-acre lake, and they're concerned about the storage capacity. This is a 6-acre pond, is that right? Or
So the pond sits on a outlot A is 6 acres altogether. And so really what we look at when we do the pond sizing is putting enough storage in it that we're able to hold enough water to meet the city's release rates. That's one of the things we've been able to work with is Tracy and Cesar on the city of Ames has a very, very great stormwater management design system requirements. And so we're making sure that the volume is sized to be able to meet the flow rate release rate.
I was looking at the drawing in your council packet shows, it looks like it's at least 7 or 8 foot deep. Is that right?
Yep. So we're 8 foot deep is the plan.
So how many acre feet is being stored on this?
I don't have that right
Okay,
now.
I was just
Yep.
trying to get a frame of reference from a standpoint that this is not a small pond.
No, it's not a
pretty
small pond
deep,
by
and
any
so I
means.
just, one of the concerns that we heard was, you know, is it gonna get this deluge coming into their pond, causing a dam to be breached? That was their concern.
No, what we have to do, one of the requirements that the city has that we have strived and we've met is that we look at what is the release rate as if we take, if it's not a farm field, if it was a prairie in good condition, before anybody did anything, what was that release rate for that water going onto the neighbor's property? And that's what we have to meet. And so our pond is big enough to hold all of that water back. So our release rate is actually going to be a prairie in good condition. So our pond is big enough. I don't have the exact
That's okay.
acre feet of storage, but that's how big it is to be able to meet that volume release rate.
And you mentioned you're gonna discharge water to different points. Is that, can you explain that better?
Yeah, so we'll have the main discharge point will be the southwest corner coming out of that pond. We do have, it's not shown on this map, but on Outlot B, kind of in the grass area north of the existing pond, a small dry basin there that will help handle the stormwater for lots 5 and 6. That stormwater basin will outlet into the existing pond and then continue to flow as normal. And the other 2 small outlet points will be on the drainage ways, the primary drainage way that's kind of in the northern half of lot 2. And then there's one kind of up by the northern half of lot 3, where those will be controlled releases to control, it'll let low flow out to be able to continue to feed the Isaac Walton League and take the big storms to the south for the pond to manage it.
Is there a reason why they couldn't be discharged to the north and get back to their natural flow areas?
So if we were to just discharge right at on those 2 drainage ways, then we wouldn't be meeting city code because we wouldn't be having volume detention or any of the other requirements on those pieces.
No, I meant you keep the same discharge, but instead of going to the south.
So routing,
you
so
go southeast and go north to try and get the water to their pond.
So the water will get to their pond. When it leaves our southwest corner, it does get to their pond.
There's a natural-
Via an existing surface.
Yeah, there's an existing channel that flows into their pond.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
It'll just be out of a control structure that'll be, I guess, a measured discharge, meeting our requirements.
Okay.
You can see that on the aerial. That's the pattern right through this corner. The
I
grading
can't
plan.
see any cursor.
Right.
It's right in the very south.
Very hard to see.
Where?
So you
In the very southwest corner. Yeah,
Right.
there you go.
So that does get to their pond.
Yep, that does get to their pond.
And can you comment on dissolved salts?
So that's one thing we'll have to look at with those hydrodynamic separators and make sure that we're getting one that's able to look at those dissolved salts as well.
You're almost talking about desalinization.
No, because it's a lot of especially if on the snow movement, it's if you're getting it
Still in
the
solid.
chunks. Yeah.
If they're not using if they're not doing brine solution.
Yep.
So I just real quickly, I'm sort of getting lost. We've never had on my time at council anything like this level of detail, and I'm trying to sort out what our role on city council is. So we're going to be asked to approve a plat, and it has to meet certain standards. And maybe you could tease out for us the difference, or the city staff, someone, what is our role in terms of safeguarding and following city code? And then it seems like some of this is above and beyond with the goal, as Chuck said, of wanting to be good neighbors. Help us understand as council, what is our role here?
I think Tracy's going to address part of it. I'll address part of it. So as a subdivision, chapter 23 is your design criteria for the layout of the subdivision. It ties in to the stormwater management, which Tracy will comment on. So you have criteria that say that you have to address stormwater. It's expressly stated you have to deal with water that's coming from above the site, and you have discharge below the site that you have to take care of.
And that's in terms, excuse me, that's both in volume and quality.
in chapter 23, it is not quality, it is
Okay,
volume.
just volume, okay?
But we have an additional ordinance that Tracy can talk about. And then in addition to that reference to stormwater, your subdivision layout has to meet our design standards, which are in 401 of chapter 23. And one of those is, are you appropriately treating natural features, or are you retaining natural features that are necessary, essentially? So if the subdivision layout was not viewed in that light to be satisfactory, separate from what its water treatment features were, I know they're related, but we really focus on the performance side with stormwater more so than in this case on what features are on the site. So staff has said that the grading plan and the lot layout is consistent with the general standards of section 401. And we're relying to some degree on that it's complying with the more strict requirements of the stormwater management. So you're looking at it through two eyes. Mostly council's looking at it through chapter 23, because staff is really the one that, for the most part, is into the technical details about stormwater management. And then Tracy should take it from there.
So 5B addresses the flood control, which, I've been before you numerous times talking about the 6-inch rainfalls that we got in 2016, 2018. So those are one-time events. And then we also have the cumulative river flooding that it continues to rain and ultimately achieves another 100-year, but through a different means. So that's that flood control aspect. And then our 5B also refers to water quality. So it's talking about reducing nutrients and reducing the erosion in the streams by reducing the flows and then controlling it before it's released. And also talking about minimizing any increases in non-pollutant source pollutions. And so obviously that's what a lot of the conversation is that we are having tonight as far as minimizing those. Stormwater basins are designed to have that water quality component within the basins. They are designed, there's a section of the Iowa Stormwater Management Manual. Those basins are designed to have a water quality component to let that sediment settle out and the particulates. So when we reintroduce those points to make sure they're continuing to discharge where they want to continue to have that water, then that's why the hydrodynamic separators were introduced, because we still need a water quality component at that point. These are really common. Before I started at the city, I worked in the Chesapeake Bay watershed for 3.5 years on Washington, D.C., Maryland, Virginia. I used so many of these on tight sites. It was very common and very successful to use those types of units. Walmart on South Duff has some Vortechnics units, and possibly a little different, but they're very successful there as well. So they're treating water quality. So we do have some of them in town. Not a huge amount, but we do have some.
So just on that point,
Mhm.
so maybe some of this stuff is just happening and it's not coming to council. So there are requirements that we're just not saying. That's what I'm trying to tease out. Are we supposed to be concerned about the hydrocarbons and the salt?
We work with those, like I said, Greg talked about, they haven't specifically talked which hydrodynamic separator unit they are going to look at installing. So we can work with them and see which ones can address the chlorides, if possible, but they already are taking care of the sediment. And so you have pieces of the nutrients. So we talk about the nutrient reduction strategy a lot with you guys. Those phosphorus particles attached to the sediment particles, that's why taking out the sediment is so important. We don't usually get into all of these details with you guys.
Thank you. On behalf of council, thank you.
That's
But again,
why
is the
getting a lot-
question, the project as proposed, does it meet city standards? That's the question I think you're asking.
Absolutely. And
Does it meet city council policy or law first? Whether you go above and beyond, that's a
Mm-hmm.
different issue. But you're asking, is it approvable according to our standards?
Right. And so, yeah, as I mentioned when I first started, is that they have an approvable plan as it is. But we can continue to have conversations and see to what level maybe we have another group meeting to see what can be done, but we can continue those conversations before ultimately approving it, but it is an approvable plan.
So I'm going to try and bring it to a close. So the fact that the developer is willing to go above and beyond the approval plan is really just their effort to be good neighbors and have a project that they're proud of. Am I saying that correctly? In other words, we can't turn this down if those requirements aren't met. Am I saying that correctly?
So what you would need to do is approve the plat conditional upon an approved stormwater management plan, because we can't approve the stormwater management plan until we get that Army Corps of Engineer permit,
Right.
just in case there's something from that in relation to wetlands or something water quality related. But we can approve it as they are meeting what we've got for requirements of flood control and water quality once we get that information.
Okay. And that you give me what I need. Thanks.
And
And to be clear, that is alternative one, is a conditional approval with what Tracy just articulated.
Just conditional upon receiving the Corps of Engineer.
There's some other details with to finalize the stormwater management plan and the court permit.
Right.
That is alternative one.
Tim, I agree with you 100%. And I think that the only reason for asking these questions and different details, that these are concerns that were raised by Isaac Walton in an effort to try and get these questions all answered, get on the table, find out what's going on. And because they actually want the water, it's not they don't want the water. It's a unique situation. And it's just trying to not have to have this come again once before the council again and again and again, and it gives some direction to the staff so council can go ahead and move forward. So I apologize if it did seem like I was getting into excessive detail, but which is very true. That's my first question to Tracy. Does this meet where does council's piece stop, but also trying to be sympathetic to the fact that there's some concerns. People came and they addressed them, and it sounds like they're really working hard to try and work together at that level. So. Is there anyone else that want to address council before I close public input? All right, we'll close public input, and there are any closing questions or comments for staff? Thanks for being here, Tracy and Caesar. Appreciate your feedback.
Yeah, maybe just one comment. Obviously, we're just getting the summarized version. There was a lot of conversation that happened before tonight. So thank you to everyone who participated, the staff, the developer, Isaac Walton. I love the Isaac Walton League. I'm not a member there, out there for scouting events for decades. And your generosity with the community is outstanding. You're a great community, great public citizen, opening your facility up. It's a beautiful, beautiful place. And so I love the fact that we're going to do a development that takes the natural beauty and the quality of that water into account. So this is a great city that we spend this much time trying to get this right. So I'll move alternative one.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Roll call.
Aye.
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 I would like to thank Cesar because he was a huge part of bringing everybody together, because he was in the separate conversations and he really sees those conversations are very critical of being at the same table and having the conversation. So I would like to thank him.
Thank you. Thank you, Cesar.
Thanks, Caesar. All right. Next item, 26B, TIF development agreement.
So we're now talking about the development agreement that's proposed in response to the city's RFP. So almost a year ago, we reviewed the need or the interest in the city supporting an industrial subdivision with small lots to augment the supply of land within the city. And in January, you received one RFP, and we've been working on that with the developer to formulate a viable plan, which led to the preliminary plat that you just approved. We reviewed with you back in April the specific terms that we thought would be applied to the project. And the main issue back in April was we did not understand, I shouldn't say we didn't understand, we didn't have confidence, either the developer or staff, on what the cost of public improvements would be. So the intent of our RFP was to have a developer propose to create small lots, which were defined as less than 3 acres. There's 5 of those in this proposal. That they would also agree to build speculative buildings. So it wasn't just vacant land, but there was a schedule where spec buildings would get built. Those aren't commonly done in Ames. So it does help our economic development if there's some buildings available for users as they arrive. And those are the 2 big main things that we desired. And then to facilitate that, we offered to use tax increment financing to support the infrastructure deployment necessary for the subdivision to be created. And this was really kind of the inverse model of the last project the city did, which was the Ames Community Development Park 4th edition off of South Bell. In that model, it was the same idea of small lots, a little bit larger lots. Developer did the development, but the city constructed the infrastructure. In negotiations, we realized it was probably faster. There was less of a burden on city staff to design and bid the project, and probably was cheaper than having the city design and bid the project itself. So that is why we're here today with a developer rebate as part of this development agreement. So the terms in the agreement itself are very, very much like what you saw in the spring. The final dollar amount that staff is recommending is about $2.96 million to cover the improvements for water, sewer, construction of Bailey Road, the streetlights and the sidewalks, the shared use path extension, as well as the turn lanes on Dayton Avenue. Those are the generally the public infrastructure that is included within that number. That final number also includes the condition from the preliminary plat that has the sanitary sewer extending further to the north. So about 300 feet was added to that at the last design step of the process into that number. So staff is recommending approval. Again, it is a developer rebate, so it is the developer's risk to move forward on the project. They will have to construct the improvements within and final plat the subdivision within the next, I think it's the summer of 2023. The developer's very clear they're eager to do the project and not delay that. So that is our expectation from an economic development perspective, that they move forward quickly again. So we have a timeline here to see performance to go along with that incentive that we have. We included an unsigned agreement for you on Friday at 4 o'clock today. We did receive a final version signed by the developer. There was no material changes. The dollar amount, the schedules, the terms, all of those things are the same. So we do have a signed copy with some minor edits to language for clarity, but no terms were altered with that final agreement. So we have received that. So that's why staff is recommending approval tonight. So any questions on the details of the development agreement?
Any questions? All right, open up public comment. Does anyone want to address council on this item? Seeing none, will close public input. Entertain a motion.
Move alternative 1.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Roll call.
Aye.
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 Thank you. All right, moving on to item 27, staff report regarding zoning text amendment to the wholesale trade and display store parking rate.
All right. So we have received a request from Fox Strand, on behalf of a client that they're working with. This particular client is a regional furniture store operator, and they requested a text amendment to reduce the parking rate for furniture stores, it'd be display stores, furniture stores, wholesale trade, from our current 1 space per 500 square foot requirement to a 1 space per 625 square foot requirement, as per their letter that they submitted last month. So what we're coming with you tonight with is we actually have a couple of options, and then we lay that out in our report. The first option is to pursue the developer's request that you see there. We also did come up with a second option that council may want to consider, which is more comprehensive, And that is an option whereby once a particular site, a non-residential site, commercial or industrial, achieves more than 100 spaces, there would be an option to, planning director option to reduce that by 20%. So we do give some examples of existing sites in the community, an office, warehouse, and then Super Walmart, Fairway. We just kind of laid out there what that would look like if this was in place today or when they were built, if they would have had the option to reduce parking. One of the benefits to doing that is that it reduces impervious space. It also does assist with being able to develop on somewhat smaller sites over time. So again, we have the two options there, and
Reduce.
we can take any questions.
I love that option too. It's like you've been listening to our willingness to axe parking requirements. That's great.
Would there be any situations in which option 2, the planning director wouldn't want to waive the 20%, or would this be pretty standard? Anyone who kind of looks at the reduction is eligible if they match.
I think with that, we haven't written that out and pieced it into the code. My intent was there was not really much discretion. There wouldn't be particular criteria. The intent would be to grant it.
Okay.
If we come up with something we need safeguards against, we'll obviously pull that into any drafting of an ordinance. But right now, I'm not sure what we would want to safeguard against.
Perfect.
You don't want to give Kelly that much power.
I heard non-residential, so I.
Yeah,
is
so
that-
so actually residential is not going to be covered by this. It has too many ties to the rental code. We do not want to cut those requirements at this time without some wholesale community understanding of what residential parking standards would be. So this would really just be non-residential uses.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Open up public comment. Does anyone want to address council on this topic tonight?
Chuck Winkleblack, one last time for the evening. I represent the seller of the property and have been working with, other than Olive Garden, we get more requests for furniture store, and that we haven't had one in the city for almost 25 years, I think. So we would urge you to move this forward so we can finalize, hopefully, their site plan, which is working. They've had some challenges with that, so would urge your approval.
Chuck, if I could, Mayor, could I ask one question? So just because of your background in development work, could you speak to the merits of option 2 that we're looking at tonight? So we can look at this narrowly, but I think there's an interest in maybe seeing if there's some value broadly. Could you speak to that?
I mean, it's got filled up now, but I mean, I use the property across from my office, the old Kmart property. And even as I drive by Walmart every day in the mall, we have a sea of parking that, other than a couple days of year, remains a sea of parking that we know fills up our storm sewers, and we flush more stuff down in there. So again, like Rachel, I can't think of a really a downside, or if it did, I felt like Kelly or a future planning director would say, all right, we need to take a hard look at this. But the seas of parking, I think we can all agree, are not good for our community. We'd rather have green space. And the other thing that I think it hopefully would help is we get some of these islands that we get crammed into these parking things that don't work, and the trees don't do very well, that hopefully that would give us some more green space. I don't know how that will impact that, but I think that could hopefully be an upside of having more efficient sites for these big properties. But I think most of them you drive by and it's mostly vacant.
Thanks.
I think from staff's view on this one, it equals exactly what the furniture store request is, but where we've seen the most common possible, do we really have to build it all, is really in the industrial world. Density of employees varies greatly. So I think it's the industrial users that may take advantage of this more than the retail users, but it does work for the furniture store the same, whether you do option 1 or option 2.
Anybody else want to address council? All right, we'll close public input. Further questions or comments?
I'd move option 2.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded for discussion. All right. Those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstaining? Motion carried. All right. Moving on to item 28, staff report regarding zoning text amendment home occupation.
Have one more planner coming up. Benjamin will discuss this item with you. Go where you like.
Okay, I'm going to try and be brief on this very technical report. Earlier this year, the governor signed into law a bill that pertains to the regulation of home-based occupations. The Ames zoning ordinance refers to home-based occupations or home-based businesses as home occupations. They're the same thing, just different terms. The new regulations preempt local laws and limit how a city can regulate a home-based business, principally regarding no-impact businesses. In order to comply with the state regulations, the city needs to amend its code. Home occupations are considered secondary to the primary use, and they are allowed in all residential zoning districts and cover a wide range of uses, some of which are considered permitted with just an administrative permit, and some of which are specially permitted with review by the Zoning Board of Adjustment. The current code also has a list of prohibited uses. The new state law does not allow cities to regulate home-based businesses by use, which our current code does, but allows them to regulate by intensity of use and potential impacts to a neighborhood, including parking on the street, noise, odor, pollution, etc. The state law reads in part that a city shall not prohibit a no-impact home-based business or otherwise require a person to apply, register, or obtain a permit, license, variance, or other type of approval from the city to operate the no-impact home-based business. So that is that phrase there is key, no-impact home-based business, which is one that is essentially a business that's operating inside of a house or in a yard out of view from the surrounding property and doesn't create any negative impacts on the surrounding property. If the business is classified as no impact, the City of Ames may not require any kind of permit or review. It is essentially allowed by right. And if the city receives any complaints about the no impact home-based business, staff can investigate and ascertain if the business is complying with the criteria. The city may still require permits for home occupations that are not no impact home-based businesses. The city may also continue to apply criteria for home-based businesses. We currently have a list of criteria. They're included in the staff report, and we talked with the city attorney's office and with our inspections division, and believe that our current approach can be made to continue in applying the regulations to home occupations. New standards would need to be applied in certain cases to comply with state law, but many of our current criteria could carry over. And we do have staff is proposing two options. One is that home occupations would be allowed by right, subject as long as they comply with the criteria. So there would be no permits. If the city receives a complaint, we can investigate. We find that the home occupation is not complying with the criteria. You either have to cease the operations or modify them in such a way as to comply with the criteria. And the second option is would set a criteria for what state law requires to be permitted in the no impact category. There'd be essentially we'd have no impact businesses, and then we could have a category of impactful home-based businesses where the Zoning Board of Adjustment could approve something beyond the criteria that are laid forth in the code. and staff does recommend option 1. And I can take any questions.
Questions for staff? All right, I'll open up public comment. Does anyone that have wishes to address council on this item?
I don't know if this thing even is, but it's like, I take donations for T-shirts and buttons and things like that, talk about my political views. And I get some money for it, but I mean, it's like there's enough businesses I've gone into towns where I carry my signs in, and they say they don't want me shopping because I'm carrying a silly sign. And it's like, it's happened at Walmart, Target, and Hy-Vee, as well as other places. And it's like, you don't want my business, they don't want my money, they don't want me shopping in those stores, and I don't think that's right. You know, it's like I don't know. They're a business, and I mean, it's like they don't want mine.
Thanks, Richard. All right, we'll close public comment. Any closing questions for staff, comments? Otherwise, I entertain a motion.
Just a moment of griping that this is just another example of the state of Iowa who believes that the most responsive government is the closest one. That doesn't seem to apply for city governments. So I wouldn't begin to tell Burlington or Sioux City how to make decisions for its community. And I am astounded by the boldness of our state legislature to continue to interfere with home rule. So there's my gripe, but we're sort of stuck with it, right?
Is it, what was their motivation? Not, this isn't a question for staff, but what, is this a gun sales issue?
No, I read one newspaper article from the legislature trying to understand where it came from. I don't think it was about that. I think he tied it into, I don't think we are in any way the issue. We have permitted by right things. We have a ton, almost everything can go to the ZBA. We were not the bad actor to motivate this. He didn't really call out any one city. He thought it was just appropriate that in these times, many people work at home and might have a secondary income, and he didn't want the government to restrict your ability to use your home to create income for yourself. It was not, from that article or anything I saw, about a specific type
Issue.
of activity.
Okay. Interesting. All right.
That's how I took it from that one interview that he had given.
Okay. Thanks.
But yeah, I would agree. We're not the ones that are doing anything to stop any reasonable thing from happening as a business in the city.
Okay. Thanks.
Is there a motion?
Do we have to take, oh, we did take.
Pardon me?
Yeah, and if whichever version you choose, right, we're going to go into drafting the text amendment. We gave you an outline that it's going to be altered a little bit as we go through this, and it'll obviously come back to you're not approving it tonight.
Just to clarify the two, staff would prefer option number
We
one.
think number one is workable. What you're really leaving out is potentially a public notice component with the zoning board of adjustment. With one, there's no notice. Anybody can just start their business, which some could already do today. Option two would have that component where maybe you go to ZBA and your neighbors are aware of what you're doing in advance.
Move option one.
Second.
Okay. Moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstaining? Motion carried.
All right.
Thank you, Kelly. All right. Moving on to item number 29, hearing on power plant renovation project. Mr. Com is present in the audience and willing to take any of your questions. Any questions? If not, entertain a motion to receive the reported bids and motion to receive reported bids.
We're going to reject.
I believe we're rejecting bids, Mayor.
Yeah, it says, I'm just following the agenda. Alternative number,
Report.
do you need a motion to receive the report of bids?
You can't receive and then reject. It could be the same motion.
Okay, all right. Is there a motion to receive the report of bids and reject all bids?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Great. Thank you.
All right, moving on to disposition of communications to council. We have 2 items. Email from Sandra Wilson requesting a policy regarding gardening spaces for renters. Is there any interest in?
Mayor, I wrote to her and made her aware of the options that we have, and I think she's already applied for a garden spot, so I don't know that anything.
Okay, all right. Hearing no motion, we'll just move on. Item 2, motion, or memo from Kelly regarding text amendment solar energy systems.
I would move that we put this on a future agenda.
Second.
Okay, those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. All right, moving on to council comments. Bryce, we'll start with you.
The only thing is, I'm excited to meet with the mayor and our student body president next week to set the agenda for our joint meeting on October 26th.
Nothing for me tonight, thanks.
Rachel.
Nothing tonight, thanks.
Nothing for me. Only that the Iowa League of Cities will meet next year in Cedar Rapids, September 20th through 22nd. And it was a great event.
It was. Tim?
And I will add to that, very excited. John's not going to mention this, but he is the president-elect.
No, president.
Now the president, yeah, president of the Iowa League of Cities. And so the mayor, just to give a minute on this, organized, correct me if I'm wrong, organized a organization of mayors that had never existed before.
Right.
And so showing tremendous leadership statewide. And I think this helps the city to have you in the role of president of the Iowa League of Cities. So it's more time, it's more meetings, but very proud of that. And then second thing, the Eco Fair I thought was a very successful event. And I happened to have asked a lot of staff what time they got up in the morning to be there. And they got up, most of them got up at 5 a.m. to do the setup. So this is above and beyond. And so thank you to the marvelous staff that we have in the city. That's all I have tonight.
Thank you. I'll just mention that we also had our first community conversation on mental health, and it was on suicide. And Deb, do you want to come up and just, this wasn't planned, but just kind of just give a real brief report on what observations we met yesterday and did a plus delta. There's a lot of positives, and there's some things we're going to change. And I just find it interesting is that one of the things that Susan brought up in her community survey was education and communication and community engagement. And that's one thing that we're going to be trying to work on in terms of letting people know about it. But you want to just give a quick update to council before we close?
Sure. So the event was held in the library auditorium, and we had well over 50 people attending. And then, of course, our panelists and staff. And we heard a very personal story from our very own firefighter, Sarah Shingren, about the loss of her son about a year ago to suicide. And one of the panelists also talked about her son's suicide, Dr. Sherry Flugrad with Mary Greeley Medical Center. So very powerful stories. It is something we wanted to catch the attention of the audience. And then we had agencies there that talked about their services and what they were seeing throughout Story County in terms of suicide and mental health issues. So I think it was well received. We didn't get through all of our panelists, but we are picking up where we left off with our next event on November 3rd. That is a Thursday, and that will be at the water treatment plant. And that event will have mental health education and resources, so panelists available. We do encourage people to attend. It's open to the public. It's free, 6:30 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. And we'll be promoting this. This is one thing that we talked about at our meeting yesterday was doing more promotion of these events. We kind of hit the ground running with the first one. So we will be promoting this one, and then we'll have 4 more following the one in November. It'll run through next spring.
You guys mentioned the Moving Forward group also.
Oh, yes. Moving forward. So this is a student group, student-led, student-operated group from the Gilbert School District. They say it's for the students, by the students,
Right.
and they form together this group that encourages students to get together and talk about their mental health issues. They do a lot of social kinds of things, whether it's game night, grilling out, movie night. And it is something that's hands off with the school and parents. It is students that are directing this. It's been very successful. And 3 of them were there last week and talked about how the group is working together for the community of Gilbert. And hopefully it inspires other students in other school districts to do something similar.
This group was in response to Dr. Flugrad's son committing suicide, and they just said, we've got to do something different. And it was a very moving story by the first gal who she was contemplating committing suicide the night before, changed her mind, went to school the next day, found out about the suicide of her friend, which then spurred on talking with several people, which then caused this organization. I just can't say enough how proud and amazed I am by this group and what they're doing. They have 170 kids that are participating now in this group. And the recording is now, of this event is now live, I believe. I just got an email from Bill. Is that correct, Susan? Posted in the morning, so you can watch it online. And then also this group was on KHOI. It's Julie Saxton has a monthly
Mental health
piece, and she interviewed them, and that recording also is available in KHOI's archives as well too. So so it's just it was a very I think it was productive, and it's just something that we need. It's a hard conversation, but thank you, Deb, and all the staff that helped out with it. A lot of work went into it, and we really appreciate, a couple of council members be able to come to the next one to show support. We're also going to be reaching out again to other school districts to come and participate, as well too. So sometimes it takes a while to get things going, but it was pretty emotional evening. So anyway, all right. Thanks, Deb. Appreciate it for being on the spot. All right. With that, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you.